Good afternoon and welcome to another in our special edition. That's our Saturday Sports special of Talk Sports. And today, as promised, we have our special guest. And usually I take the time to do a proper introduction of our guest. But this time around, I thought it fitting that I should just introduce our guest just by name and allow him to give a full introduction. Folks, this afternoon's guest is no other than a veteran broadcaster. I know he doesn't like to hear the word veteran. Um, and also former national goalkeeper and someone who has dipped into so many things in the fabric of Grenadian society. Folks, our guest this afternoon is no other than Mr. Paul Roberts. Good afternoon to you, Paul. Paul, Pablo, good afternoon.
Yeah, Pablo, that's great. Yeah, good to have you around. Good to have you around too, Mike. I haven't seen you for some time, and it's good to be with you. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity of possibility of at least transmitting some of the information that I've been holding there because you're the first person who's been able to get it out of me for an awfully long time. But I'll try to do my best to transmit that era, fantastic era of the 1960s, 70s, both in sport and in the media.
So we consider that to be a prelude to a book Paul is probably writing.
Well, it's not a book per se, it's just an idea of where I've come from. In fact, it was a good friend of mine who was both basically was part and parcel of radio. And he says, I was telling him these stories of the experiences of Waves and way back when in football. And he said, hey, at least write that down because these stories are attractive. And I said, oh, yeah, who cares? A lot of people, of my ilk went through the same sort of thing. So I don't think my story is unique per se, but he says, write it down. And so I did a little sketch, and I think I sent you a copy recently. So that I'm going to pull a lot from.
Right. Well, Paul, so before we get full throttle, I always ask, how are you been coping with the pandemic? How have you been coping with that?
Well, the pandemic here, you call it a pandemic. It's a pandemic. I guess it's a pandemic in the United States of America. It's a pandemic in all other countries, but to me, it's just another cold, another seasonal cold. Let me qualify that. In that every time around Carnival, you expect a back and neck or something because there's an influx of visitors. After Christmas, when in fact very many people go back, you have again another cold or some strange thing which hits, in fact, the populace. And as far as I'm concerned, this is just the next one of them. And because you understand that I dare say we're not COVID free, but we haven't had the kind of pandemic proportion that I've been seeing in New York, in other countries in the world, and so on. So I wouldn't call it a pandemic. I can just call it an attack of the COVID-19 in Grenada because it has not so far taken a death. Plus, very few people in Grenada do have it. We've had some gatherings and we haven't had the community spread that very many of us have been anticipating. That doesn't say we're out of the woods. It has been basically a come here disease, as we tend to call it locally. It is a disease which is brought in by people who have come back from holiday. This has been our experience with COVID-19. I'm sorry, it's not a pandemic in Grenada yet.
Well, if that's that, your response seems that is an indication of what we expect on this program. Um,
Mm.
Hard hitting will be Pablo. Paul, let's get started in terms of your introduction to the media, and we'll sail into the sports media. But your introduction to the media over the years, I mean, how were you able to get started? I assume it would have been probably in the late 60s or early 70s. How were you able to get involved in the media?
Much earlier than that. And this is a story I tell you. Very few people are aware of it because I've been keeping it for a long time. Since I'm about 8 years old, 9 years old, we lived in Blogo Cottage, where it's called Williamson Road in St. George's. Very many of us would recognize that was the first ghetto of the 60s. And what we did, myself and a couple of guys, tinkered with what was called crystal radio, and this always attracted me. I had the friendship of Terence Patterson, the late Terence Patterson, we used to call him Plummies, and DJ Akela, Robert D. Riggs. From the beginning, we had downstairs our home this little radio, and we were into ham radio. We were into radio generally way back when in those days, and I always wanted to get to WIBS, which was the lone radio station in Grenada, and but of course there was a social bar, and I would not have been socially accepted that way. So we tinkered, and I decided to have the dream. I got a little upset. I said, well, listen, much. I can do radio. So at around 10, 12 years old, I decided, you know what's going to happen? I'm going to have my own radio station. To hell was what happened. And so what you've seen today is an assiduous movement to owning radio in Grenada without going nowhere, and not associating himself with any bigwig who comes with a bag full of tricks saying, hey, a radio station costs $1 million to operate. No, 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 no. I said, listen, Grenadians all over would be able to open their own radio station, and I started it. And I've seen the fruition today, more than 23 FM stations in Grenada. And that is a fantastic, fantastic, satisfaction to me, recognizing that, Grenadians could now open their own radio station. That is how it happened with me. Subsequently, I decided, listen, I've got to do something about bringing this thing to fruition. So what it automatically did was expose me, even in primary school, to WIBS. We put myself and Terence Patterson pushed our way into WIBS, Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. And here's where we called probably a couple of names. I met people like Ray Smith. I met people like Jerry Romaine. In fact, Jerry Romaine, I must say at this point in time, was a key person, because when we went in there, we couldn't, it's a social blockade. You couldn't get into the van, much less to get into the radio station, unless you are an official visitor. And Jerry Romaine took us into the actual studios, and he accommodated us for every Saturday. Every Saturday we would go down there at around 1 o'clock and stay there until 6. That was my introduction to the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. Subsequently, I decided, let's watch. I'm going to try to get in there. But before I was able to do that, I had to bring in some income, because in those days it was attachments. You didn't get paid. So I found myself a job at Jonas Brown and Hubbard's, the parts department. And there's where the juxtapositioning took place between radio and sport. And I'll tell you the story a little later on. But I got involved in parts sales of Jonas Brown and Hubbard's. And that allowed me to generate some income, play my sport, and at the same time, run after my lifelong desire to own a radio station in Grenada by going to find out what it was all about in WIBS. The Hubbard's, Jonas Brown and Hubbard's, there was an opening, I think at that time. Margaret Roberts, who was a regular announcer on the Windward Islands, the then Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. It's an amalgamation of the 4 radio stations in 4 Windward Islands radio stations. That's St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, and Dominica. And I happened to have seen that they needed someone. I got in there quickly, and but of course I didn't get on the air. Terry Patterson got on the air. I was relegated to the control room. And the control room was pretty important, because that's where I learned all the idiosyncrasies of the technical aspect of radio. So I spent some time in the control room. In those days, the recorders were as big as a house. You might remember, they were massive. 2 people had to lift up a recorder. That's the kind of introduction I had in the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. I walked my way through there, and I think there was a opening in the newsroom at that time. And because of my background, one of the areas of interest has also been in the usage of the English language, literature, and history, because that dates back to the Grenada Boys Secondary School, where I had some fantastic teachers and masters, people like Daddy Bakes, Mr. Batiste was headmaster. He taught us literature and language. And we had people like the late Sir Paul Schoon, who really contributed tremendously to my being able to understand the usage of the English language, the idiosyncrasies of the language, again, the influences and the relationship between what I spoke normally and what is spoken on air. So that got me into the newsroom. And I became a full-fledged journalist then, Mike. You know, before I was just a broadcaster, I became a full-fledged journalist. I learned how to hunt down news, how to access information for news. And at that time in the newsroom too, there was a name which I suspect you would recognize, Hermione Charles.
Yes, the
You
late
know,
Hermione.
right. You know, the usual thing, you hear that news, that voice. She was a linguistic expert.
Yes.
And so I learned a lot from her. She did German, French, she spoke some Italian, and Latin particularly she was good in. So anytime I had a problem, Homian or Hermione, Homian I used to call her, but her right name, she pronounced it Hermione. I knew it as Homian. Um, how do you pronounce that name? And she'd look at the word and she says, all right, it has French origin. There's some Latin there. And there's German involved there with the English. So this is how you pronounce it. So my goodness, that is the kind of schooling I had very, very early in WIBS. I then moved to being on air because at that time, Radio Windward Islands Broadcasting Service was changing into Radio Grenada. Of course, that's why I link it politically. I didn't know at the time the changes which were made and why they were made, but I'd become adept in the newsroom. And Eric Matthew Gary at that time, Premier of Grenada, decided to, and as you know, he used to use the radio station for his own ends. The news was written from the gardens, for heaven's sake, you know. And I became very adept at being able to present the news with some sort of oomph. And I always remember, and I didn't know why at the time, Eric Gary would call in and say, Mr. Roberts, who is there? Say, well, I'm here, sir, in the newsroom. Who else is there? I've got Mr. So-and-so. I think it was Mike Sylvan at that time. Mr. Roberts, I want you to read the news for me. I didn't understand why. But again, he saw me as an individual who probably could enunciate, who could use the kind of words that he wanted to use, you know, and that helped me get better. Strangely enough, Eric Matthew Gary deciding that I have to read news, and he demanded that I read news. In fact, a lot of times I was off. But he called, and they always called me and say, hey, come in and read the news, because the appropriate person is not there to read the news. Of course, by appropriate, and I need to tell this story too, Basil Harford was also, I met Basil Harford in the newsroom. And he ran afoul of Eric Matthew Gary in the newsroom at WIBS and also at Radio Grenada. And we always had the joke of Basil, there was an announcement which was supposed to have gone out over and over and over for about 4 or 5 months. Eric Matthew Gary's girlfriend, or girl, which he was closely associated with, obviously lost a bracelet. And that announcement was going over and over and over and over. And then one day, Basil decided, listen, watch, if the bracelet isn't found now, it won't be found again. That got back to Sir Eric Matthew Gary. And again, I pause here to say, you see the complete control which the political leadership had from since time immemorial in the media or in radio.
But that was even before independence.
Yeah, that was long before independence. Yeah, and Basil Harford at that time was moved because of that to go to the Treasury. And he was a little bit lucky because the very many other people who have been in WIBS and interfered with Eric Matthew Gary end up going and con gravel. We know they sent you to the gravel heap, you know? So we used to call Basil case of the missing bracelet. Up to today, and it's a pity, but he's not all there with us this time. Basil Harford would have had tremendous history for you about the development of WIBS into Radio Grenada and the methodology we use in programming. Unfortunately, he's not all there at this point in time with age. And we used to up to TIC Basil, if I have to see him, I say, hey, case of the missing bracelet, because that comes back at you of how it used to be controlled. Now, from there, I moved to a full-fledged broadcaster, and the incident happened. Radio Grenada. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to when you were speaking about yourself and the late Plummies, that's Terrence.
Yeah, Terrence Patterson.
That was actually, yeah, Terrence Patterson. That was actually school days, even though you were
School
in
days,
broadcasting. School
primary
days.
schools in Heinzie School. We
And then,
started going to Ray Wibbs in Heinzie School, believe it or not, yeah.
yeah, and
And
then
it's
into the GBSs.
into the GBSs. I didn't even know you know Terry. Well, you know Terrence
No,
Patterson.
heard the
He's as
name.
old as Road.
Heard the name. Heard the name.
The name, right. Yes, he
Yeah,
was a top class broadcaster.
right.
And
Yeah.
we started together. We went through it together. We went to, Whips together. He went into the actual studio, and I went into, like I said, control room where I learned the technical aspect of radio because that was important to me. I needed to have my own, and I needed to learn every possible aspect of radio that there was, and that was a good start for me. So yeah, following that, I decided to go on air, and in fact, I think at that time someone left. I think it was the late great Lee Olivashi or something like that had left Grenada and went abroad. And there was a space, and I remember, um, I think at the time the manager was Ray Smith, and who I had helped a lot with. We had a specific program which we called Tonight. What is Tonight on Wibs at 9? And I used to help Ray produce the program, and he understand my ability to do recordings, to understand editing, and those are time editing you edit with either scissors or a razor blade, to cut the tape, literally cut an S off the tape. And he realized I was pretty good. And so he used me, and then he discovered that, hey, I had some verbal ability. So he took me in as a radio announcer. And that's when it started. Immediately after that, the massive change took place, and Wibs turned into Radio Grenada. And I guess historically, you know the story of that, in that Eric Matthew Gary used to send down his announcements, and up so many years later, I still remember it, This is the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service, the news. I used to avoid saying my name because, that reticent of mine. So after that, we'd say, Dr. the Right Honorable Sir Eric M. Gary, JPOLFRSA, had a meeting with the Korean ambassador and spoke about matters which redound to the tremendous benefit of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit. Now, this thing came as rote. That was what came from the gardens. So I found myself being able to read the long 5-page news releases. The thing is, that created major problem for St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica, because a lot of politics went into it. Gary spoke about where he went. The Prime Minister today visited Sobeys, where he met Mrs. So-and-so, that sort of thing like that. And so the premiers, the various premiers of the Windward Islands decided, listen, we don't want that on our radio station, This is the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. Only deal with news which is relevant. Gary couldn't hear. And so Gary got upset. I'm just synopsizing, and decided, well, gentlemen, I have the main station in Grenada. I'm going to keep the radio stations. I'm sorry, we have got to break and go all our way. And that was it. Whips broke up. Radio Grenada came on board. That was how Radio Grenada fundamentally started, because of the political breakup and the political breakage of the rules, so to speak, of the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. And as you know, as the story go on, this thing would in fact show itself in almost every future aspect of political leadership in Grenada. It was radio, and so I found myself in the middle of this thing they call radio. It was, of course, our media, because it was a radio station, because at that time, it was kind of different, and please, I'm telling the story, but Mike, interrupt me anytime you'd like, because the story is flowing in my mind.
Yeah, and because I wanted to, the late Hermione Charles, as you indicated, very appropriate with syntax. And I recall having a script, and well, your news script, as a matter of fact, whether it's news or sports, and Hermione will go over the script and put her, her marks and thing, and it will actually indicate, intonation and, all the works. But interestingly enough, while we're speaking about that, Lincoln Torre Deputy is giving us one of the late Thelma Campbell, TC, as you know.
Thelma TC,
Right. And he
yes.
said that she told us that after the newscast was read, and if someone said there was a phone call and it was Mr. Gary, she would head for the washroom and tell them to say to Mr. Gary, she is not available. I
You know,
guess
much time I get sick for not for when the phone call come, I say, "Boy, that is Gary." You know, much time you run out of that newsroom. It's because Eric Gary would call you and say, "Mr. Roberts, there's a change in the news item," you know, and you'd have to listen to him. No, you're looking at the clock because the news is at a particular time, and Eric Gary would dictate this newscast. I mean, it was dread times, but it was learning times for me. Now I look back. It's a lot of fun. It's really, really amusing. How we survive that is amazing.
but during the era of the whips,
Mm,
was Grenada considered the seat of whips, the
it
central?
was.
It was.
It was. In fact, all other personnel who went to the various outstations in Vincent St. Lucia, Dominica, all came to Grenada to train. And in fact, I had the opportunity of training quite a number of them in Grenada. We had in St. Vincent, oh gosh, I forget her name. I went to the BBC training with her. We had Dominica. I trained quite a number of people who've been in Dominica. In fact, I trained the then manager. Subsequently became manager of the DBS radio when the changes take place. And so, yes, it was the mecca of radio in the Windward Islands. Not only in the Windward Islands, because we are respected in Jamaica. Because I remember making the announcement, you know, this is the Windward Islands Broadcasting Service. We now close transmission or open transmission to Jamaica and the rest of the Eastern Caribbean on 15.105 megahertz in the 19th meter band. Now, I still remember this crap after so many years. But yes, Grenada Station was the mecca. Cricket, it passed through us and it went out to the rest of the station, to the rest of the Caribbean. You know, so if there's cricketing in England, oh boy, they use Wibs as the source. Even Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, wherever, they used our source. And that's why I learned so much in the control room, because I had to learn the elimination of background noise, using particular equipment there, because you have to understand that the Caribbean is listening, that sort of thing. And so it really helped me tremendously. And boy, I learned all the nuances of radio in the control room, in Wibs, stroke Radio Grenada.
Okay, I just saw a comment there from Jason Skeet saying that I would not trade the knowledge and training I got from this foundation. Paul Roberts has to be knighted. And I thinking about who in Grenada in the current broadcasting field, well, and I'm not talking about those that just spin in the music, would not have passed through the hands of, well, should I say Sir Paul Roberts according to
I like that.
no, but you know, the many folks that would have passed through Paul Roberts, worked with Paul Roberts to some extent, mentor. I heard from Roland Glean earlier.
Oh, yeah, Roland.
Yeah, and
Yes.
he'd say, make sure you tell Paul that my
Yeah.
regards. In fact, he sent me an audio voice, his regards to you as well. And even Eddie Frederick is saying Paul is the source of many of us. And then there's the good Harold Paisady. At the tender age of 16, Paul invited me to join himself and Ras Dakari to broadcast basketball at the Melville Street courts. That was my first hobby, well, outside broadcast. Eternally grateful, Pablo. So
wait, hold on. And I was particularly and we enjoyed, because you know Harold Piasity is an individual who lifts things around us. I could never remember, and this I must tell you this story about Harold. Harold came to the broadcast, in fact, in the park. He liked cricket, and he was, you know, and Pappy Tate comes in from the southern end. He bowls outside the off stump, and you know, and I saw Harold Piasity come in. Harold, come on, I'm tired. Come on, take off from this. This game boring. And Harold came on, and Harold, in fact, is an exploiter of the English language. And Harold sat down, and he says, again, Papitet comes in from the southern end, runs away from us, short sleeve flapping. He kicks into the air like a donkey, and he delivers this one. And I looked at the game, and I couldn't believe that this is the same game I've just been commentating, and it's so boring. He made everything come alive around him. just like the character he is. Everything comes alive. He was a joy to work with, boy.
Okay, and then Eddie is actually saying, that's Eddie Frederick. I remain
Mm.
ever grateful for his identifying me back 33 years ago. That's a
Yes,
long
yes.
time.
Story about Eddie. I remember that I was doing, again, this is part of the radio story because I understood at Spice Capital Radio at that time, we needed a sort of a talk show, so to speak. This Sunday talk show, I'm sorry, I'm going to take um, um, responsibility for it. So I decided to, it's not necessarily me. I went to the United States of America and in New York, in fact, in 14th Street, I bounced up a friend, a guy who I became friendly with, and he had a family radio station, and he did this talk show on Sundays, and he had a lot of people listening to him. And I said, "Hey, I want to use that when I get back." I got back, and I started this talk show, and people at Force in Grenada used to put cloth over the receiver or the transmitting equipment of the telephone to speak to me. After a time, people got braver and braver. The program grew, and I realized that I had to find somebody to really take over this talk show circuit. I looked around. At that time, I think Eddie Frederick was working with the Informer newspaper, and he was writing articles. And again, I listened to him. His ability to use the English language very fluently. At the same time, quickly slip into the vernacular, the Grenadianese, and he was able to, with ease, move in and out and to convey the meaning, accurately. So I said, "Hey, Eddie, would you mind coming on, start and take over this program for me, please?" And Eddie said, "Yes." I didn't realize it was that long, 33 years. Oh my God. Eddie didn't look back. He hasn't looked back. Fantastic, in fact, talk show host. He started basically to put meaning to talk show on Spice Capital Radio.
Mhm. Let's just head back to that period of the Gary era,
Mm-hmm.
where I think you noted somewhere or the other that there was some sort of friction between, well, so Eric Gary and the late Leslie Sion Horsemouth,
Yes,
who
that
was
was
then
funny.
the manager, the station manager at the time. What can you entail? What exactly happened?
Let me give the first and foremost. Here's where Leslie Sion came in. He was, in fact, in the BBC, British Broadcast Corporation, and we would hear Calling the Caribbean, London Calling the Caribbean, and this was Leslie Sion. So Leslie Sion was a household name at the BBC and also in Grenada. Eric Matthew Gary at that time has taken over, I think, Wibs and he was looking towards, I think, his independence. I think it was just pre 1974. And he decided that he was going to people the station with someone with tremendous knowledge. And so he called Leslie Siant from his job as a producer at the BBC to come to manage Radio Grenada. And there's where I met Leslie Siant. In fact, Leslie Siant met me there. And he said to me, "Youngster, I heard tell that you play football." He says, "You're the national goalkeeper now." Leslie Sion's background is that he played for, I think it was All Blacks. And that was he played football, so he had an interest. He says, "But I didn't realize you were that good. People are telling me you're good, man." He says, listen, what you're doing here. This was my second year, and I hadn't got a salary. This was the interest I had, myself and Plums, Terry Patterson had in radio. And he says, "But you're not getting a salary, you're crazy." And he automatically in those days gave me a salary of 112. I was on top of the hill. First salary I get, Leslie Sion made it possible. And then Leslie Sion said to me, "Paul, listen, watch. There's a big match taking place in Victoria." Now, I didn't know nothing about commentary at that time, football commentary. There's a big match, Victoria Guave. And to put it in perspective, Victoria Guave was blood and sand in those days. Football was it. It was pride. It was village versus village. And so we expected cutlass and fight in Victoria. Leslie Cian called me and he says, "Select somebody. And Paul, you're going to go up there and do the broadcast." I said, "But Mr. Cian, I don't." He says, "Listen, watch. You can speak the English language? Well, yes, sir. And you're working at Radio Grenada? Yes, sir. Well, go and say what you see. That was his that was my exposure. So I got at that time, I'll never forget, Finbar Fletcher. He was working at the time at the Ministry of Sport. He was in fact one of the individuals who had close liaison with Finbar Fletcher. You would remember him, Mike, as being one of the 100 yards record holders for Presentation Brothers College many years ago. Remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Right. He worked in the Ministry of Sport. I said, hey, Kimber, let's go and try to do this thing. And he went up there, and that was myself, and Fimber Fletcher's first exposure to a live football broadcast. Of course, nothing happened, simply because I suspect Hurricanes at that time, Victoria we call them, won the game, with the likes of Heads George and his brother, and they were sparking at that time. So they beat Guelph. So they didn't have to attack Guelph, because that's the problem. If Victoria lose the game, they go win the war. that was the nature of football in those times.
Okay. The actual incident I wanted you to get at was
I'm coming.
Where Sir Eric Gary ultimately fired Leslie Sion, and the whole incident with the fire truck and Gary commanding the fire truck to the area. And, I think
that was funny.
Yeah.
It was 1969. I remember that date because it was the exposition date for Grenada. And we were at the then Nutmeg Theatre. That's a special building set with a stage in which they were going to be Trinidad night, Barbados night, all the Caribbean countries. And on that night, it was Trinidad night. And Sparrow, the mighty Sparrow, came down to Grenada to, in fact, perform on Trinidad and Tobago night. At the time, Leslie Sion, everything was going fine. Leslie Sion was in the booth and he was, speaking to everybody. And Leslie Sion, if you remember him, late Leslie Sion, he likes to imbibe, to put it nicely. But locally speaking, boy, Leslie used to drink that rum, So what happened is he realized there was nothing else. The show was going on. He got a little imbibe. And but at that time, Sparrow was on stage with his sasai and the lizard jump up and all these double entendre calypsos, which made Sparrow the greatest. And for some reason or other, Eric Matthew Gary didn't like it, Victorian nature, and he called in and said, listen, you have to break this broadcasting with immediacy. Now, Alan Palmer was the operator at that time. So Alan Palmer jumped and he says, Lord, what you can do? Eric Gary, it wasn't broken. Eric Gary calls back and he says, please, are you going to break the broadcast or not? This must not go on. I don't want that on my radio station. I don't want that on my radio station. Somewhere along the line, the boy Alan Palmer get confused, he get nervous. Luckily at that time, in walks Leslie Sion, the manager of the station, and Leslie, and he told us, he says, I'm sorry, the Prime Minister says, the Premier says, break the broadcast. He says, I am sorry, I am the boss here. Leslie, with two in his head, say, hey, I'm the boss here, he can't tell me what to broadcast and what's not to broadcast. No, forget him, ignore him. And Gary called back the third time, and I don't know what happened. There was an exchange between himself, Leslie Sion, phone dropped down, and Leslie walked out the booth. Next thing you hear, Fire Brigade coming down the line. Gary, it was True Blue. It was Trinidad night. The road was packed to capacity, everybody in Grenada, because, Trinidadian, stroke Grenadian, the mighty Sparrow. This is the show of the century. Everybody who's everybody down there, every possible car. And it was blocked, period. The road was just sort of blocked. Gary realized that if he used his car and his VIP image, he would not even be able to get through. So he called the fire brigade and he says, hey, there's a fire down in True Blue, come get me. And he jumped on board the fire tender. Everybody, of course, had to, clear the way for the fire tender to come to go to the Nutmeg Theatre. He drove in with the fire tender, got off the fire tender, came up to the Nutmeg Theatre studio, and he's looking around for Leslie Sion, looking for Mr. Sion. Well, we don't know where he is, sir. Alan Palmer frightened. And I particularly remember that story because Alan Palmer, before he died, by the way, Alan Palmer left us earlier this year. I was able to go to the Chester's nursing home, and we had a mighty laugh over that incident. And Alan, I remember, he says at that time, like early on this year, he said, but I was frightened by it. I didn't know what to do. I said, I don't get fired. And Gary had that sort of image, he came in his short pants and everything else. And he says, Mr. Sian is not here. Okay. Remember, he's no more the manager of this radio station. He is fired immediately. Don't let him come into this building. And that was it. Leslie lost his job. He gained the power of that leadership in Grenada over the media. It's going to play itself over and over and over as the story go on with Blaze, with all the other premiers or key leaders, prime ministers, and even up to today with Dr. Keith Mitchell. It is something which is endemic in Grenadian leaders or Caribbean leaders generally to interfere totally in the media. And that started way back when. So it's not a novelty event, but we'll talk about that as time goes on.
Yeah, and the comments are coming in, and I have to get to some of the comments, but I wanted you to speak a bit on the introduction of FM broadcasting in Grenada. Yourself on Stanley Charles, I think.
Yeah,
getting involved and introducing FM broadcasting in Grenada.
Yeah, the story is an epic one, and it's a very amusing one when we look back. Stanley Charles, I got to know Stanley Charles when I was the manager of Radio Free Grenada. That's during the revolutionary times. Stanley Charles this guy came in from England, black Englishman, I like to call him, and I can say that because we're pretty good friends. Walked in and he spoke in this British accent, but I knew of him, but I know what he looked like. And Stanley Charles was, in fact, the producer of the famous Black Londoners on the BBC in Britain. He was so well known. He produced that show. The show was well known in Britain. It reflects, in fact, Caribbean people in Britain, and in fact, some of the difficulties they were going through and all that. So he was big. Stanley came into Grenada. I knew of Black Londoners, and so I reckon, being a broadcaster, you recognize this is an epic broadcaster. So he came into the studio, and we were speaking and everything else like that. And somewhere along the, and this is an amusing thing, somewhere along the line, Stanley, it seemed, was associated with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, with the British High Commission, the American CARICOM desk. Now, he is a broadcaster. He is a journalist of no mean repute. These are his sources. But somewhere along the line, this thing created major problems for the then person who was involved in the position of Deputy Secretary for Information, one Phyllis Cord. Stanley came, and I explained to him that, listen, certain things, Stanley, you cannot do in Grenada. Stanley decided that he was going to do what has to be done relative to, in fact, transmission of information, because a lot of information was coming out of London and coming into Grenada, and it was not satisfactory to, in fact, the PRG at that time. When I suspect the security forces during the revolutionary time discovered that Stanley Charles was in Grenada, I all of a sudden got a visit from Phyllis Cord. She walked into my office, then the manager of Radio Free Grenada, and says, well, I'm looking for one Stanley Charles. I said, well, he's not here, Phyllis. He says, well, where is he? I said, well, I know that he was going back. And that was about 2 hours afterwards. He said he was going back to London. He says, oh, yeah? And she walked out. Later on, I discovered that the security forces were on Stanley's track, but he had already left the airport for London. He missed it by the skin of his teeth, and me and Stanley spoke about that when subsequently we got friendly. Stanley Charles was, in fact, one of the individuals who were keeping the Caribbean diaspora in London up to date relative to the circumstances we were going under during the 1983 debacle period, both from the standpoint of, in fact, the politics, the internal politics, and also the plan of the United States of America to invade. Now, he was very friendly with Eugenia Charles. That was his key. And the Eugenia Charles name is going to be very important a little later on in the story. Now, the background is that Eugenia Charles went to school at the convent here in Grenada for many years. She was very friendly with R.M. Bola, who incidentally is Stanley Charles' father. Keep that in mind. So somewhere along the line afterwards, Stanley decided to come back to Grenada. But before that, I was working for the psychological operations of the U.S. Army after the invasion. Bonnie Fletcher grabbed me and I was working there. And I decided I want to push forward with my decision to own a radio station in Grenada.
Paul, just
And,
go back.
but I'm taking you to the story.
Yeah, but you said you were working for the what?
The psychological operations of the U.S. Army. In fact, it was an arm of that is the arm which controlled radio. That is Spice Island Radio, the radio station you heard that Americans going round and round and in Grenada at the time of the invasion.
Is it
Psychological operations ran that.
Is it a quasi CIA operative, whatever it is?
No, it is military intelligence.
Okay.
And that was just an arm of the military intelligence, and they did all the propaganda you must have seen in those days, all the posters which had Bernard Coates' face and an X on it and all. I saw all of this being done in that compound, right, of psychological operations. So that was the kind of situation which existed at the time. I met a lieutenant, in fact, there. And I was still pushing my idea of owning my station. And I said to him, listen, watch, after this thing, would you mind coming back to Grenada? Because Grenadians are a funny lot, especially the leadership. They like investment coming from people abroad. He was semi-white, he was Puerto Rican. And so I said, boy, especially I knew Blaze. I really approached Blaze about the possibility of a radio station. And Blaze said, listen, I'm looking for real investors and I'm looking Mr. Robinson looking for investors. That's how he speaks, And I realized he didn't mean me. He wants foreign direct investment. Now, note the words there. Foreign direct investment. It ain't old. That statement is as new today as it was yesterday. But that is what is meant. I mean, fundamentally and raw, let's face it, Blaze wanted a white man to come in to open up a radio station because he didn't think any black Grenadian could do it. So that was the reality. And I decided I wanted my radio station. So I talked to the lieutenant and he said to me, well, okay, I'll come back after this, my tours ended and I'll help you open the station. In the meantime, Stanley came back from Britain and he came to me and he said, hey, Pablo, I come here. I want to open the radio station. I said, yeah, well, me too. He says, well, all right. Well, let's twin. I said, all right. So we called the station FM 90, which was my concept, FM 90, Radio Labé, FM 90 Radio Labé, and we opened the station and we decided and planned to open the station in St. Andrews as the first FM station in Grenada. That's how the station name, the association with Stanley Charles came, and my decision to open up FM in Grenada at the Horse's Mouth, incidentally, in St. Andrews. So that's the story as it goes relative to that.
And it wasn't an easy ride for Radio Labé, though.
Oh gosh, I like that. And the story went again. You're pulling a lot out of me. When we decided we were going to go for Radio Labé, at that time, Blaze's government was formed. The NNP, Blaze's NNP government was formed, and we had the Minister of Communication and Works being Dr. Keith Mitchell. Stanley decided to go to Dr. Mitchell and say to him, listen, we want to open up a radio station. And I remember at that time, Dr. Mitchell said, well, listen, watch, we have old Radio Grenada. There's a transmitter there which you can use. After we came out, I said, Stanley, we're not going AM. AM is old. That is old school stuff. We're going FM, full quality, So Dr. Mitchell gave us the support to open the radio station. And I know for a fact we were in his office in those times. So Stanley, knowing he had the support of Dr. Mitchell, subsequently started to lobby again the Prime Minister of the country at that time, H.A. Blaze. And eventually we got the license. In fact, the license came in two parts. One, a cabinet conclusion saying that we are able to open up Radio La Bay. Himself and Stanley Charles were attached to that license, provided that you get a frequency line from the Ministry of Communications and Works. This was at the time in the gardens and under the auspices of Dr. Keith Mitchell, who was Minister of Communication and Works. So we didn't have a problem. At that ministry there was one Leroy Batiste, and I'm calling the name because I guess I'm media too. You have to corroborate all this information I'm giving because it is part and parcel of our history. Leroy lost his job subsequent to the debacle which occurred with, in fact, Radio La Bay. The story went that Stanley and myself decided we putting banners all over the place and promote that we're going to open Radio La Bay. And first radio station in Grenada, privately owned, blah, 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 FM, the works. And what Stanley, the mistake Stanley made, I don't know if this was a mistake, but what Stanley did, because I told you that himself and Eugenia Charles and his father, R.M. Bowler, were good friends. So Stanley Charles, having the serious liaison between Eugenia Charles and himself at Black Londoners in England, decided to invite Eugenia Charles to open the radio station. She was going to stay in La Bay at the house or in Grenville, at the house and at the home of R.M. Bowler. Blaze saw red. How can Stanley Charles and Paul Roberts, who they think they are? I am the Prime Minister of this country. I mean, they got to ask me permission, and besides, this is a security breach. We can't have Eugenia Charles coming here. She's Prime Minister of Dominica. Now, Eugenia Charles answered by saying, but I'm coming as a private citizen. I'm coming as a friend of a family. Blaze, listen. And he says that he will give a national address. And Blaze literally went on air and said that Paul Roberts and Stanley Charles are putting banners all over the place, touting that they're opening up a radio station called Radio La Bay, and they do not have the permission from the government. Blaze went and he lied to the nation. I couldn't believe that. And so what I did, and this is very important, I decided that, and let me take it in perspective. Stanley Charles decided to take him on. And so we had the station. I had gone to the States, the United States, in fact, New York to be exact, and visited B&H, Mike. I visited B&H and about all the studio equipment there and everything else. We had Radio La Bay just about operational. Stanley went on air and he refuted the claim of the Prime Minister. And somewhere along the line, and I won't call his name because he's living now, but the person was an ASP attached to the St. Andrews branch of the Royal Grenada Police Force. He was issued instructions to close down Radio La Bay and arrest Stanley Charles and Paul Roberts. Now, Stanley understood what was happening. I didn't, a little bit naive. So Stanley Charles sent us down early, and while we were listening in the car to Radio La Bay, we heard Stanley just saying, and the police are coming in now. And one, I almost called his name, but I wouldn't call his name, because he's living now, and I don't want to really cast any aspersion on that position he's in. And he says he's now attacking us, and he's breaking down the door. And Stanley gave a live running commentary of the police entry into Radio La Bay studios, live and direct. They got in. I don't know. After a time, I heard the transmitter went, and obviously they arrested Stanley Charles, and both of us got a writ saying that we were charged with operating illegally and without a license a radio station called Radio La Bay. We spent 7 years extricating ourselves from that massive lie of Blaze. That is the nature of politicians and politics.
So you actually detailing how and we still haven't gone into the what I can call the later years. We reach as far as the late Hubbard Blaze and Gary, and even to an extent the revolution, the PRG aspect of it. But you have indicated how politics played a part in the media landscape in Grenada. But even before we go on to that, Paul, your father, as you indicated, was also handpicked by the late Sir Evan
Yeah.
Roll.
Yeah. Oh,
And
you're
he
Sagariite, as all of our families. Come on, your family was Sagariite, right? Your mother and father was Sagariite. The
yeah,
whole Grenada was Sagariite. But just before I go into that, to explain that aspect of it, what is important is that even at the time of the raid, I had a copy of the licenses, the two documentation. And I must say, the late, I don't know why he did, Carla Briggs has been a key help with this thing of the informer and Errol Maitland. They printed these two documents on the back page of the informer at that time. And still, we had to fight going straight up to the High Court to be able to extricate ourselves. That was the nature of the power. In fact, would Sally used to say, and I don't, well, I mean, it's history, so I can say, yes, the political system was in bed with the legal system at that time. That was reality. That's why we spent 7 years in limbo, and that was a reality.
yeah. So going back to your father, who
Ben Roberts, yeah.
yeah, the late Ben Roberts, who was I think was commissioner of police at the time too, but he had bearing into your involvement and your, well, I should say involvement into sports, not just broadcasting, but actually playing sports as a footballer, as a cricketer, etc.
Yeah. Well, Ben Roberts played for Rangers and again All Blacks a number, and he was well. I mean, just telling because a lot of people outside they're remembering now. I suspect in the diaspora, Grenadians would remember Crapo. They used to call him. That's what I heard, Crapo, because of his ability to jump. That wasn't the key element really, which got me into sport. What got me into sport in a very serious way was the fact that I was dead scared of Ben Roberts. Ben Roberts was a serious disciplinarian. He had just come back from the West India Regiment. World War II was just finished. So he was sparking with his disciplinary measures. He taught boxing in GBSS. He had the police boys club because he was also and he was also the founding member of the Grenada Voluntary Constabulary, the GVC. So he had a commission in the police as an assistant superintendent of police. He was, in fact, much later on in charge of a Majesty's Prisoners Commissioner. He later on became the first commandant of the Green Beast, right? The Grenada military force. And he was also the de facto person in charge of the Mongoose gang. Now, how do you fight a father like that? So what I had to do, I was so scared of this guy. So I used to spend as little time home as possible. And that is what allowed me to walk into football. And so football was a kind of accident for me because I walked into football, started in Tantine, Big Dog and all these boys playing football. I couldn't, I'm a little boy, so I had to sit down on the side. They had an extra position for a goalkeeper. And they said, listen, you young boy, go in the goal. In those days, that's how they spoke. So I go in the goal. And because of my background in getting away from Ben Roberts, playing, going to the, to what was again, to the barracks in town, playing basketball with pussy, police, pencil, all of us playing basketball. Realizing that I had to play table tennis. I played all the sports that I was to play because I had to get away from Ben Roberts. I want to go home and sleep only. So I became adept at that. So during that game, I remembered I was just catching ball, and the fellas watch at me and say, "Wait now, hey young boy, you could save. Who's your father?" I said, "Well, Ben Roberts." He said, "Oh, so what's your name, Paul?" He said, "Okay, Paul Ben." That's how the name came. And I think it was Big Dog, who gave me that name because I couldn't go on the field with the bigger boys. And so this is how I walked into football. And going to GBSS later on, I eventually there was in fact a guy called Nanton, David Nanton, I think it was, who recognized my style and decided to make me into a goalkeeper. And then there was Georgie Maguire, who saw I had something, grabbed on to hold on to me, and I would have to train and train. And then I decided with all that interest in me, let me take this thing seriously, man. And at 16 years old, I became, of course, the national goalkeeper for the youth team. And well, I never look back. And along the way, a lot of stories, mad stories. But I spent 35 years as 25 years as a national goalkeeper for Grenada, and that was my introduction to the actual goalkeeping aspect of sport.
Yeah, well, we have quite a bit to talk about regarding that. I want to go back to some of the comments.
Hmm.
Um, Randy Green,
Yeah,
many know him as Roland, said,
Roland was a commentator, right? He
right,
was there with us. Yes, Roland was
Harold,
fantastic.
Harold pulled me into the booth with him in 1986 while covering a GFA game alone with no color commentator. A few days later, I was at Queen's Park and I saw him waving to me from the booth to come up. Paul was waiting for Elliot Maguire, who did not
Yeah.
make it. So Paul and I did the game. Harold and I worked with Pablo as color commentator. The next couple of years, Paul and I teamed up to cover mostly football, while I did intercall, etc., with Harold and Richard Simon until I went to study in '88.
Yep,
But
yep,
as I've
yep.
watched and listened to international broadcasting over the years, and can proudly say that Pablo is as good or as better than most of them. So that was
Oh
Randy.
yes, Roland. I know him as, and Roland came back to Grenada. I remember him with his Canadian accent. He had his Canadian accent, and he's the one who introduced us to a different usage of the English language. And I remember his commentating. And Bob Belfon passes backward, makes a backward pass, and it's an itinerant pass. I say, a what? Itinerant pass. And I started to use that in my commentary also. So Roland, you've made a serious contribution to developing my lingo, my football lingo.
Okay, and
And so yes, he's been a very, very important additive. And in fact, it was a time, and I need to call this name too, when in fact Ambrose Phillip, then the General Secretary of the Grenada Football Association, was looking at ways and means of how he would develop football and make football all encompassing, because what was happening, a lot of the major games were taking place in St. George's, and the people in Victoria, weren't able to hear. So I remember that Ambrose came to us and he says, listen, watch, Pablo, listen, what I want you to get some commentators together from. Bring a group of commentators and volunteer your services, and I will pay Radio Grenada to bring games every afternoon. Ambrose Phillip was in fact the architect of that mushrooming in the 70s of the popularity of football in Grenada, and I must give him kudos because that's the reality.
okay, we will flow into the sports full time in a short while, but um, for the comments you made earlier, I think Harold Pyson is now saying that we both work at SI Radio. That's Spicer, I think Spicer Radio. Which were the crates that were put in Point Celine after the intervention by the US. You were the chief. I was in a confused state of mind then after the bloodshed of the demise of the rebel. I never asked you, but what was your mindset back then, broadcasting from the crates at Point Celine with the US military all around us?
Well, again, a lot of people. The thing is, historically, I'm lucky because I had people like Daddy Biggs who really taught me a lot of history. I had Paul Schoon who dealt with the cognitive thinking and make me reason particular developmental issues, and that was what came to mind because I like Pisces energy level. His ability to transmit information was good, and was decidedly Caribbean. It wasn't. I mean, I call myself a foreigner because I had to learn when I went to Wales to speak the English language properly. Otherwise, no one would listen to you. You have to speak in that thick British tone. And Harold Passy was a real McCoy. So I look to Harold as a person who would be the bridge and, in fact, the future of broadcasting. That is why I brought it there. And I must say, at this point in time, we ran into a lot of difficulty because I misread the establishment. And Bonnie Fletcher, who was the guy in charge overall in charge, because he was, in fact, the special advisor to the Governor General and he was particularly in charge of that area. And Bonnie Fletcher just took a dislike to Harold Paisley. I couldn't understand why. And there was an incident. I think Harold must have made some vernacular comment or something like, which is really down to earth Grenadian. And Bonnie Fletcher left where he was and came down and he fired her. Well, at first and foremost, he cussed me out. And then he fired Harold Paisley. And I call names, and this is the truth, you know. But that is the reason why I use Harold Paisley and subsequent other people, because I saw Harold Paisley as, in fact, the gateway to the tomorrows after the revolution. And I wasn't wrong. Look at what he did. Look at what he did for our culture. I wasn't wrong. I was bang on. Unfortunately, this situation occurred where his career was just cut short all of a sudden because he was tremendously good.
Okay. Before we continue, I think you may want to start using your headpiece now. There's a slight feedback. So if we can try, to use that. But,
okay. Well, let me see. I guess I would have to access my daughter for possible help. Yes, one second. Sorry about that. I have to call it to make sure it's Bluetooth in nature. I'm up with it, you know. The other lesson happened to me now as over as time, but I'm still up with it, you know.
yeah. But the actual part that I wanted to get to, Paul, also is the period of the revolution, 1979, March 13th, 1979. Where was Paul Roberts at that time?
I'm sorry. But let me see. I think I'm being told that it's now transmitting. All right, say that again. I'm sorry. I didn't get the last part.
Yeah, March 13th, 1979. Where was Paul Roberts at that time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had just gotten fired a couple of weeks before by Eric Martigeri. And let me start there. Because I remember I was in the newsroom again, and I was putting out a notice, an announcement. Sorry, not an announcement, but I was putting together a newscast. One of the international news items was about the Somoza regime and the Sandinistas. And of course, that was a popular, it's all over the news, BBC, VOA, you named it. And so I decided to use that as a key international item. I didn't know the Sandinista and their takeover of the Somoza regime was going to really ring that kind of dangerous bell to, you know, Eric Martigeri. But I was someone that I think at that time, Jerry Romaine was manager, so Jerry called and says, listen, the Prime Minister asked that we both go up to his office and you are to bring the newscast which you just read. So what the hell is this? Anyway, I took the newscast, went up to Mount Royal, sat in the veranda, waited on Eric here. He comes out. Oh, no, he didn't come out. I went to he had a little office. The office, by the way, which he sat behind the desk. And the trapdoor was right below. I didn't know it at that time. But just as an aside. So I went in there and he says, Mr. Roberts, I don't understand you. There are so many good things happening in Grenada. I said, yes, so, wow. But Mr. Roberts, this is the item that you have to put here. Mr. Roberts, are you a communist? Are you a communist? I said, no, sir. I mean, how do you explain this item? I mean, there's so many things happening in Grenada, Caracon, Pity Martinique, and you put in this item about Somoza and Nicaragua? He says, no. Mr. Roberts, if I report to the cabinet secretary, you are not to report again to Radio Grenada. And I lose my job, yeah. I just lose my job right away. I said, what the hell did I do? Again, naivety, it was just news. You balance your news with it. National, regional, international. And so Somoza regime fall was, by the Sandinista was an ongoing news item. Everybody had it. But Gary, I later on understood that this was a kind of, in his mind, his fashion was basically playing something that is going to indicate how he's going to reach his demise. I didn't know that at the time. Because Gary at one time called me He was upset one day. Mr. Roberts, I told you the following people is asked to go to the meeting. I said, yes, sir. Mr. Roberts, you said, ah. I said, yes, sir, but simple subject protocol. He says, Mr. Roberts, I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to more people. And he says, this is my radio station. Don't you forget it? It is my radio station. Gary was clear. He told you it was his radio station, and I was put out to trial, I suspect about 2 months or so before the revolution. And on March 13th, in fact, the story is that myself and Don Charles, of course, the musician fame, used to always interconnect, and he was saying, boy, something will happen in Grenada. You don't see them NGM boys and them. Look at the newspaper, the NGM newspaper. They're saying something happening now. They're saying something happening now. And then we heard Gary go abroad. Don called me, he said, boy, Gary go abroad. What do you think will happen? Them fellas go get locked up? What will happen? This was our theory. So we were following all the movements. So on March 13th, when I hear it was taken over, I say, oh, all right, it happened. Because I read the history the history of Grenada and what's going to happen. I say, all right. So at 6 o'clock, I was living at the time in Lower Springs. I decided, I'm going to make my way on foot because nothing moved in Grenada at that time. And I decided to and in fact, I think we were on a curfew or something like that. Anyway, I decided to make my way to the radio station. So I went through Belmont, and in Belmont, there was this lady, Helen Dales. I said, Helen, where are you going? She said, well, I'm just coming by Mrs. Dales, my mom, and I just want to find out what's going on. I said, well, listen, I would like a job, if possible, as close to Radio Grenada as possible. She said, let's go. I said, all right, I jumped in the car, and I dashed down, and she's going down to Radio Grenada. And I met just before the little hill, the little incline, which went into the actual station. All of a sudden, we saw coming out of the bushes Liam also James. So he recognized me. I know Liam, I've worked with him in Global Cartridge. So, and so I realized, and he was well armed, and he came out. Ellen got frightened. So I got out of the car and I said, listen, also, this is what I'm doing, right? There's a distortion going on at the station. The station is going to go into silence just now if you don't correct it. It's overmodulated. Well, we also didn't have a clue what I said. He said, all right. But she can't come. She had to turn around. So also allowed me to walk up the little incline. And at the incline to the hills, to the station, at the bottom gate, I met Maurice Bishop. And Maurice said, well, good to have you come on. Hey, Pablo, we have problems. I said, what happened? He said, take over the station from me, take over. But by the way, from now on, it's called Radio Free Grenada. Take over. I went up at the station, and that's where I met Pascal, and I met Edwin Frank. Frightened like hell. Frank, when he saw me, he says, thank God, shaking. So later on, I found out that the revolutionary forces got Edwin Frank and, of course, Michael Pascal, out of their beds to come to operate the station. So I ran quickly into the control room, and by that time I was an expert. I knew where everything was. Anything happening in that station, technically, I was good. So I ran quickly, corrected it, bring down the modulation and everything else like that. And I stayed there basically for the majority of the day. But in between that, what was happening is that a number of people, ministers, were coming into the station. And I was told that this is a list, get them to bear allegiance to the People's Revolutionary Government. I said, okay. And there was a little script. And so what you had was, what's his name again? The Minister of Finance, George Houston, came in. I gave him the slip. George Houston, do declare my blah, 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 blah. I recorded that and I put it out. Next one come, Mr. Prudhomme come. Herbert Prudhomme, do declare. And as fast as they come, they were there, and then they let them go home. Mrs. Gary came in. Cynthia Gary, do declare, blah, blah, blah. And, and they went home. And this was basically my job on the first day of the revolution, basically taking the information from the people who the revolutionary forces had picked up to come to bear allegiance to the People's Revolutionary Government and to declare that they would not take up arms or do anything against the government. So that was the day, and that's how I got involved in Radio Free Grenada on that March 13th morning.
Okay. Just before we continue, I want us to do just a little homework there. We have a slight audio distortion. I think you may need to just bring down your volume a bit, Paul. I think your audio coming in a bit distorted. I'm not sure if my equipment is ready for this operatic voice of yours.
All right.
Yeah, we are having a slight audio distortion.
Maybe it's modulation. What about here now? That's all right? If I drop the tones a little bit, that's okay?
I think you'll have to go down a bit. I'm still hearing a bit distortion, the crackling sound that's coming in. I know you have to call your audio technician.
She's going to come across and do the correction. Sorry, just aside, modulation is too high, so we have to drop my levels.
Yeah, just drop it a bit so that we can.
Microphone.
Yeah, microphone. Yeah, it's coming in a bit too distorted.
Okay.
Just a little crackling.
Okay. How about that? Is that okay?
You could go down a bit still. Oh, I think it's, you're using the microphone on the
the headphone on the Bluetooth, yeah.
On the Bluetooth, yeah. I think you may want to go down.
Maybe I should just disconnect it.
Okay.
Let's just disconnect it because it's creating some difficulty. So take out the Bluetooth and let's deal with it.
Yeah.
Just deal with it. Sorry about the bad play, but I have to get a little help here from.
Right. We'll get it sorted out, but very interesting discussion so far from Paul as he gets that audio sorted out a bit. Let's see if we have it there now. Yeah. So Paul, well, until he gets in, I want to read some of the comments where I think was Margaret Francis saying, Paul saying, it seems like the Sandinistas and Central America in general always got you in trouble. When we are in Scott Street, I seem to remember the Americans complaining about the newsroom's coverage of the Nicaragua and Honduras because they felt it was anti-American, you know. Then
I remember that. Yes. I got into a lot of difficulty there. Again, it was media. It is. Maybe I was naive, but I wasn't politically.
Paul, just a minute. I think we still having that audio problem there. It's
How about this now?
No. It's very difficult hearing you clearly, and there's also a slight feedback.
Okay. How about this now? Is that okay? We're dropping the levels.
Drop it still a bit, and there's a slight feedback.
Yeah, well.
Okay, I think
that should do it.
Yeah, let's see if that can work. Yeah.
All right, I'll have to drop the modulation and telling the stories. I kind of get excited getting the information too. It matters I never spoke about for a long years.
Yeah. Okay, then let's go. Right, I think we may have it covered there now.
Right. Okay. I hope so. Yep. Let's go with it.
Yeah. Just the slight feedback. I think I'm hearing I'm hearing it. So it appears like there's a slight feedback somewhere or the other. But there was some comments again that came in from the team. Oh, Basil is actually saying, good job keeping us informed, Mike. Shout out Paul. As a kid, I remember Paul made the best box kite in our area. I learned to build electronic circuits from Paul. As we all know, he was the best of all sports. He played the best goalkeeper we ever had. Paul, you need to document everything you are relating in a book. All the best.
Oh, so he remember my box kite. That was the method during the time of football. That was my methodology, selling the box kites to be able to buy our boots. Angola boots from Bata. And yes, I got very adept at the box ties because the box ties were more expensive than the regular bikes. Wow, Martin remembers that. Great. Amazing.
Mhm. Yeah. Paul, there is a story that you were self-exiled in St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Yeah,
It appears to be in during the revolutionary period.
yeah.
What
Yeah.
was the reason for this exile?
Well, I ran into difficulty with and not necessarily with the PRG, what Phyllis scored. I mean, from the get-go, I met Bernard. I know Bernard Code. He was called Hopper Code. He taught me in GBSS as a sixth A form guy. So I knew him well. We used to call him Hopper Code. And he was one of the most serious prefects. We used to freak him, right? A lot of us youngsters. So I knew him, serious character. I never knew Phyllis. It was about 2 or 3 days later on that Phyllis just appeared. And I introduced myself to her because, to tell you the truth, I was so naive. During all these years, I didn't know Phyllis Scott. I didn't have a clue who she was. Anyway, she came across, and we just didn't hit it off. We just didn't hit it off. And that developed into, in fact, it started with I was a manager of Radio Free Grenada. And she came and she said, listen, Paul, you must understand that there are a number of people here who are working at this time who can sabotage the station seriously and who can probably turn into counter-revolutionaries. I said, Lord God, but who are these people? I know them all. No, they will run the station properly, you know, because Morris Bishop already said, and nobody losing their job, we ain't doing that. But Phyllis Cole came and tell me, fire him. So I had to fire people like Denison McIntyre. I had to fire people like Nordica McIntyre, who was, his sister. The same late Nordica McIntyre, who subsequently went on to become cabinet secretary. She was sent to, in fact, the library. There was a dumping ground for Phyllis Cord. I had to get rid of people like Basil Penny from the Penny family. I had to, and I'm calling names because you need to corroborate. People who are listening to me, corroborate this thing for facts. Jackie Prudhomme, who worked at the station from the Prudhomme family, were automatically, of course, exorcised from the station simply because that was Mr. Prudhomme's daughter. And there were a couple of others, and I was told to ban them. To fire them. And I decided, listen, I'm sorry for this, I can't just do that. There's a public service commission. And she got upset. So I sent to the Public Service Commission all the list indicating somewhere along the line that the Deputy Secretary for Information, Mrs. Phyllis Cord, is indicating that she would like these individuals, to desist from working at Spice Capital Radio because of security reasons. Well, that ignited Phyllis some more. And she decided that, listen, I am not adequate. So she decided that she was going to get a number of people coming from Jamaica to really deal with the station. So she got, Patrick Smyko was one of the individuals who she hailed from the Workers' Party of Jamaica, Dr. Trevor Monroe. And of course, that ilk came into the station. And I made the dumb error of believing I could go to Morris Bishop and say to him that there's a problem. So I remember myself and Morris had that rapport. So I called him one day. Actually, I called at the time Peter St. Paul, and I said, Peter, tell Morris I really, really want to chat with him. This is the situation here at Radio Grenada getting right. So he came down to the beach. I went to the beach, and we met, and I said, listen, Morris, what is happening here is that Phyllis is Jamaicanizing the radio station. It is taking it into a different tone. She had also told me to ban all religious programs at the station, and I refused. So I said, Marx, this is what she's doing. What she's doing is 98% of the population are religious. What you're doing is commit, cultural suicide if you do that. And the first hint of I realized that I had problems was when Mara said to me, say, listen, Phyllis Code is a good sister. All right, Paul, let's compromise here. Only have relations on Sundays. But in the course of the week, ban other religious organization. In the meantime, we had a couple of programs which you might remember. Here is What is the World Tomorrow with Garner Ted Armstrong. And Phyllis hated that program. So one by one, all the programs were kicked off. We had a Ghanese preacher who was preaching, of course, dealing with the Bible, directly from the Bible. She banned him from the radio station, and subsequently, I hear he was deported. It was a religious person. So Phyllis was really controlling the system, and I warned Morris Bishop about it very, very early. And he closed ranks on me. So what happened? He said, "Listen, all right, Pablo, what you're telling me there, put it in writing." Since he tell me that, I know I'm in trouble. I said, okay. So I decided that I'm going to play it down from then forth. And I ain't telling Phyllis Code anything because I understood what was going on. She decided to take a further action at me. She sent me to Jamaica to get, I guess, assessed by the Jamaican, the WPJ group. And I met all of them, so all the group down there from the Manly Association. And they kept pumping me full of this Jamaican thing, the One Love concert. Manly is the greatest thing in the world, blah, 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 blah. And I'm getting more and more upset because I'm talking Grenada, I'm talking about Jamaica and Michael Manly. And I didn't like the Jamaican influence. When I came back, Phyllis was able to ascertain from a report from them that I was inadequate. She came to me and asked me to resign and or get transferred to our appropriate position, saying, no, you do it. By that time, we had serious problems between us. So she decided that, all right, we're going to see about that. And I got charged with supposedly using the station's coffers for giving somebody, I think it was one a family member of mine, tires or something like that, some frivolous. And I decided that I'm taking it straight to the court. And I took it to the court. And I remembered during the court session, Phyllis Code was called to give evidence. He didn't apply. She didn't. The late Campbell McBarnett was asked to give evidence. Nothing so. And I remember the judge having to throw it out. Why was the man brought here if your people weren't there to give evidence to begin with? Anyway, after that, I decided this, and I obviously have to get reinstated. There must be reinstatement here or compensation. What happened to me, I got called from one Kenrick Radix, who was then the Attorney General at the time. And he called me, what do you want to talk to me for? He called me to his office and he said, listen, let me tell you something. If you don't resign, the position you're in as manager of Media Free Grenada, we'll have no ability to find alternative charges, and you know we can do that, right? So Paul, check yourself, and you have 4 days or 3 days or something like that. But during the time of Phyllis and the problems, I understood what would happen. I never anticipated that I would have become literally an enemy to the revolution, where they're going to pick me up and put me in Mahogany Row. I said, what? So I decided I'd pay my passes right away and I head for St. Vincent. Now, my mother is Vincentian born, right? And she's from St. Vincent. So I went to St. Vincent, took my passport, and decided I'm going to turn into a Vincentian. And I started preparing documentation, right, for nationalization, becoming a citizen of St. Vincent, because I realized this thing is serious business. This revolution was turning into serious business. And it's not about me. And so about 1 month after I was in St. Vincent, after I reached halfway in preparation of the citizenship papers, all of a sudden, Mr. Hudson Tanis, that's the Minister of Foreign Affairs, attached to the then St. Vincent government, called me in and says, listen, I'm sorry, you're persona non grata, and you are to report tomorrow morning to the airport, and you are to leave St. Vincent immediately. I said, what the hell is that? How did that happen? But The security forces came, the Vincentian police, in fact, not security forces, came to my home. I wasn't there at the time, but I didn't want to be arrested, so I went to the airport. I was put in isolation, and I was deported to Grenada from St. Vincent. And I was frightened to hell all the way. So when on the plane, I decided the next thing to do is to hide, right, in full view. So what I did when I reached back, I played basketball, back to sport, basketball on the basketball court. I played small goal with Headache and Owusu and Maitland and all of the guys running there. So I was in the middle of them. I hid in plain view. I involved myself in an organization in Grenada called the South Sport Organization, the SSO. I helped build it. And so I just immersed myself in that, basically to hide away from the PRG. And that is what I did until, somewhere along the line, Maurice realized that he was running into problems right in about early 1983. And then, no, it was 82. And I don't know what happened. He called me out of the blues and he says, come to my home. And so I went up and I really know about Maurice. And Maurice said, listen, we can't leave you there because you have value. So we want you to involve yourself with TFG, Television Free Grenada. Now, I had some background in television through Joe Pitt. In fact, I was able to help Joe Pitt put together a television program, and I ran into a lot of difficulty there too. But I had background in television. So Joan Ross, a British Jamaican, was put in charge, and I was put into Television Free Grenada and to continue operating within the media during the tenure of during the rest of the year. Because subsequently, I think I went to the United States of America, and when I came back home, I was summarily fired. So I again was fired by the PRG just before the invasion. Absolutely. Would you believe it? God's child.
Paul, while you were that, I was doing some back end engineering, as you would say, and I guess we still have a slight problem on your end, and it has to do with the feedback as well. So some of you have to hear me, but I think it's coming back, and the audio is still a bit slightly distorted because I know I want our listeners and viewers to get everything you're saying, and I saw some comments where they're not hearing everything clearly based on the device they're using. Some are hearing it okay, some not hearing it too okay. So I want us to really fix it on your end in terms of the the feedback, and I think it's still a slight audio distortion. Yeah, I think I'm still hearing myself coming back there. But while we get this sorted out, just to let our listeners know that Afi Fletcher has been named in an 18-member squad for the West Indies Women's Tour of England next month. That's Grenadian Afi Fletcher, the spinner. And the women will play 5 T20 internationals against England women from September 21 to the 30th in Derby. I think they should be leaving in the next few days on a special charter flight for England, where they will be quarantined and get to play against England. Let's see now. I think Paul, are you there?
Right, I'm hearing you clearly, and still distortion. I see a reflection in your face, but I'm hearing. But the feedback's supposed to be
Yeah,
off now
but
because
if you can just drop your volume a bit, still, it's
I need to drop the volume.
yeah, your volume a bit. It's a bit loud, and we need to get that sorted out there.
That's
But
the microphone, right?
yeah, just
All
drop
right.
it a bit so that we
How's
can.
that?
Yeah, let me see. I think let's see if that could work now. I think this seems to be a little better now, Paul. But I mean, for quite a while you have been outlining various transgressions over the period of time with various regimes, even as far as Premier Eric Gary, Prime Minister, so Eric Gary, and then you talk about Hubert Blaze and during the revolution. You have had that problem with successive governments. I mean, that problem in terms of government interference and the pressure on the media. You have witnessed
Yeah.
that throughout.
That's why I said that, and I was able to deal with the formula, recognizing that this is the problem we have for the Caribbean. Because if you, again, I go back to the history. In fact, I always like to to give examples. I remember Sir Paul Spoon. You know, Paul Spoon had some problems way back with Gary days, and where Gary locked him out of his cabinet secretary office. Very many of my listeners would remember that. If you remember back when. And I remember I tried to have an interview before Sir Paul left to go to London. And I asked him the question, so do you mind telling me all the details about you know the situation you're in, and how do you feel about the prime minister at this point in time, yeah, he was prime minister then. Well, he was premier. And so Paul said, Mr. Roberts, boys will be boys. I didn't understand on earth what he meant, and he left and he turned around. Many years later on, he came back as Governor General. I remember they were having, and I did deal with this precise times. Again, to make sure it's corroborated. Wackats Clarkson had hosted a show in the Presentation Brothers College with, in fact, the National Choir and the Angel Half Steel Orchestra, at which Sir Paul Scone attended. I was there recording and doing the bits and pieces, culturally oriented. And so Paul, after the concert, came forward to me and said, listen, Mr. Roberts, I would like to have a copy of that. And then he walked away. And then he stopped. Mr. Roberts, may I have a word with you, please? Yes, sir. And I walked to him and he says, Mr. Roberts, remember many, many, many years ago, you came to me as a pipsqueak and you told me that you'd like to get information from me. What did I tell you? I said, I can't remember, sir. He said, Mr. Roberts, I told you boys will be boys. It still stands. Boys will be boys. And he turned and he walked away. It took me some time and I said, and then boom, Eureka. I said, oh my God. So Paul Scone was telling me that is how politicians does get on. And politicians' styles is manipulating human beings. And that lesson never left me. That is why I understand clearly that this thing from day one is a media problem. The media is the most dangerous thing for a politician in the Caribbean. They alone can change the voting attitudes of the populace. That is especially if you have a politician that's already vanquished the opposition, then that is the only dangerous element that's left, the media. That has proved itself over and over and over, and even up to today. So I understood clearly how the antagonism, even though there's no antagonism, there is an antagonism between the leadership, the political leadership, and the media. And in the Caribbean, it will always be there, Bascom, regardless of what, even though we take sides. And this is what has been happening. Who want to take green, who want to take yellow, I don't care what side you took. Automatically, your government gets into power, there will be antagonism within the media. And that is what is happening. It's a reality that we can't do anything about unless the education takes place relative to the whole population. That's a reality.
Okay. Paul, there was also the issue of ICE FM, a station that yourself and Stanley got involved in, I think in London, that was eventually closed down or raided or whatever it is. It seems as if you were following trouble or bringing trouble all over the globe.
Radio, the media, radio. I just happen to have chosen media, radio. After the debacle in Grenada relative to Blaze and everything else like that, Stanley Charles went back to London. And all of a sudden he called me and he says, Paul, I've got someone who will pay your airfare. And I want you to come to London to do exactly what you did with Radio Lab. I want you to build a pirate radio station for me. Nothing was happening in Grenada at the time. I was ostracized politically. So I said, sure. And I went up. And within a month, I took about a month or 2 months, and we built this station. We put everything together. We put the transmitter in place. We built a complete studio. And then it was time for me to leave. And I left. It was Ice FM. It was, in fact, a record label. It was at that time, the labels in the pirate, how should I put it, in the pirate industry in the United States of America, there was, in England, sorry, London, correction, there was competition relative to labels. Ice label, I can't remember the guy who it was, he sung Hope Joanna. He, in fact, owned that record label. And he is the one who put out the money for us to open up a pirate station for on his behalf. So I finished the pirate station and I came back down. About a week later on, Stanley called me, I don't know if from a cell or where, and told me that the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry in Britain, had shut down the station as a pirate station. So yes, the media is always a major, major problem. And I don't know if I, of course, maybe I need to go and take a bushari bath, or somebody had to pray for me. But, I seem to be always in the midst of this madness.
Okay, and Margaret is asking, Paul, are you saying that the media as a group cannot do anything to solve the problem of government interference?
No, you can't. Because this constitution has to change. The constitution has to change, giving recognition to the media, like what is happening in the United States of America. I mean, come on, it is part and parcel of. Tell me what rule says that the prime minister of the country cannot use what is this again? What they hit us again? Defamation. Lengthen the defamation charges to put you out of business within a year, which is what, in fact, the system did to us, because it didn't prevail. But by the time the judge and the jury says, hey, you're free, there was no charges. We didn't have no money left to even hire a lawyer. We couldn't even pay attention, that's to tell you. All the money gone in lawyers. All the money gone, 7 years of pressure. There is no way you could beat the politician relative to the media coming together as a group and trying to change the politician. It won't work. The rules of Grenada, the statutes of Grenada, in fact, the very constitution of Grenada gives the leadership too much power over the media. And this fourth estate nonsense that I hear a lot of people talking. The fourth estate is the United States of America and in Britain and other built-up countries. Until you reach there with a constitution and enshrine the media as part and parcel of free speech, then you have a problem. Once we operate under this ongoing constitution within the Caribbean region, we're going to have the problem, even if prime ministers don't use it. When push comes to shove and they're back against the wall, they will use it. Like, in fact, what was used to us in 1947 law, remember, against Stanley Charles. Imagine that in this 20th century, you're using sedition as a means of shutting down the media. That is the reality. It will be used, even though you don't get through it. It will create so many frictions. Like, for instance, today, the friction these bevy of charges against me created. I can't go to the bank. I mean, advertising people fall off like flies from me. People look at me and they say, we know you're right, but you and the prime minister is not good friends. The prime minister attacking you. So, boy, we can't take a chance with you. The banks tell me, one after the other, Mr. Roberts, I'm sorry. We can't take the chance. You have to understand that we've got to secure income. And if tomorrow, and I understand them, but unless the media, right, is institutionalized in our constitution, this will continue to happen for the next umpteen years. I'm sorry, that's the reality.
But in the early administration, post-revolutionary period, I know yourself and Stanley made attempts, well, not made attempts, you were successful enough to get the then government to formalize through legislation commercial broadcasting.
No, we didn't.
That wasn't successful?
No, we advised at the time Nicholas Braffett.
Okay, what was it? The attempt? The attempt.
That's not the way to go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we tried to put the power in the hands of the media. But at that time, the media wasn't properly formed. And I think they weren't conscious enough to understand that if they don't govern themselves, then politicians going to govern you. And we tried to change the attitude, but we were left out in the cold. And Nicholas Braffett at that time, instead of looking at the rules for operation of the media in Grenada, instead invented a corporation of the national grid. And how it was again, Grenada Broadcast Corporation. That's why he surprised us with. And it's only in 2000 that a piece of documentation relative to the media was brought forward. And even then, it is not about media. It is not about managing the media. It was about maximizing income for cable and telephone operation. So the media, even up to date, never mind the talk, has not really addressed some of the problems we've been having, because the media is a fundamental tool to be able to deal with serious education, culture. And I'm not saying that just like that, because I've been there in Wibs, where Leslie Sion, I got a week home for not being able to answer somebody. And I remember this little thing called from St. Giles, and they asked me who is the Prime Minister of St. Kitts. And I forgot to research it and send back to this St. Giles student the information. And Leslie Sion gave me a week home. He said, I'm sorry. You have to understand that broadcaster is serious business. You in the media people is serious business. Journalism is serious business. He says, you know sufficient. In fact, how he put it is that a journalist and a broadcaster, must know about everything, but be an expert at nothing. That was his admonition to me. And this was his attitude to radio, television, media generally. And I think until we have the media operations within our constitution, the media will be tinkered with by all leaders, period, upcoming, past, present, and future.
Okay, and there's also the allegations that you were directly told that, I think it would have been through your call-in programs or whatever it is, about the involvement of, at that time, some women. I don't know if they were critical of the then government, that either you shut them up or you be shut down.
Yeah. And it's hilarious. But the thing is, we had two ladies who used to call into my talk show. I used to do the morning show, and at 6:20, I think it was, people, in fact, Josan McKee would remember that, Derek Sion would remember that, they are scared like hell of the program because of the political import of it. So these ladies what they used to do, it was coming around, it was just a talk show program relative to a standpipe talk show thing. What is wrong? Tell the government, let them correct it. But around election time, it turned into electioneering. And these ladies, what they did, they took their little tape recorders, went out to the political meetings, recorded the actual voices of the politicians, and then called the radio station and say to them that listen to the lies he telling, listen to the lies he telling. Cheese and bread, everybody's scared. That fateful morning, the lady called and she says to me, Paul, listen, watch, let me tell you. I think that some or the other, we must change from having our old modest, which is, a sanitary pad for our children, change it to the more modern type. We must eliminate this old time modest. And I think that our children would be able to be more healthy and blah, blah, blah. And she went on, and it sounds rational. Immediately after she put down the phone, a caller called me and said, yes, tell her if it's modest she wants to get rid of, I have 3 little ones here. And if she wants fight, I could deal with it. And Paul, let me tell you something. If you ain't stop them woman from appearing on the station day, and if you ain't done this program, right, we could shut you down. It was Modest, who was at that time the general secretary of a political party. And she was throwing words at him, and I didn't know. I didn't understand it until afterwards with this. I can't remember what Modesti was. You might remember his name. But he cussed the lady out live on the record. And that was the first time I understand what she was saying. What was the sanitary napkin all about? And it was an amusing story, but it is real. Because you see, a political operative of a particular party was able to literally shut off a very popular talk show program with a threat like that. And believe it or not, he had the power to do it next morning. That was the story.
Okay. Well, Paul, we do have quite a bit to go still in terms of the state of the media, broadcasting, sports broadcasting, your involvement in football, etc., etc. Quite a lot to cover still. But the there was the issue also, and we're trying to shed some light on some things because, as you said, it's the first time you get in a very long time to talk about all these things. The late Dr. Raphael Fletcher, it's
So
said
yes,
that Paul Roberts and Spice Capital Radio were part of the whole Dr. Raphael Fletcher resignation and eventual demise with the then NNP. Add to that the involvement of Grace Duncan, etc., etc. What was Paul's role and Spice, your radio station's role in
well,
accommodating Dr. Raphael Fletcher?
and I need to tell you all this, and I need to call names and be very, very accurate again for corroboration. It was, I think Dr. Fletcher, Raphael Fletcher, ran into serious difficulty with, of course, the existing government. And the person, I have to give Jack his jacket, who really was called out was George Worm, very good friend of course, of the media. And he was called by Dr. Fletcher saying, I am going to the Governor General tonight to resign. And that would, of course, have brought the government down. So George called Stanley and me and said, listen, I'm a newspaper. What I suggest you all do something with Dr. Fletcher. So Stanley decided that, all right, we're going to cut programming. And it was, I think it was, and we first did the broadcast at midnight after he came back from the Governor General. And when in fact, the government fell. I don't know if Dr. Mitchell knew at that time if Dr. Fletcher had went to the Governor General, but he came direct to the radio station and we did an almost 3-hour interview with him. And he recounted all the problems within the NNP party that he's been experiencing. And this was his words. It wasn't us. And then while the program was going on, Miss Grace Duncan called into the program. And she, of course, issued a lot of information, come on, we couldn't believe this was going down. And this was her claim. But this was two NNP operatives, Dr. Raphael Fletcher and Miss Grace Duncan. Now, somewhere along the line, the establishment decide that it was not supposed to be done by us. And this is one of the reasons why I think I got the false accusation. The guy come up to my house. In fact, the former commissioner of police, right, Bido, came up there looking for Stanley Charles and asking me if I know about any broadcasts and them kind of things like that. This is why I think the leadership of the NNP at the time zeroed in on me. Because this is just proper broadcasting. Come on, I got a scoop. And I mean, it came straight from the horse's mouth. It's not no rapportage or no nothing. It came straight from the people themselves. But we were kept in mind by the political leadership for ages after that. So that was the story of the situation relative to Dr. Fletcher. That is why, and sometimes Dr. Fletcher saw so much trouble after that, because remember following that debacle, because Stanley Charles wasn't with me at that time. He was basically, because he was Spice Capital Radio, and he wasn't part of Spice Capital Radio, he was part of Radio Labé and ISFM and so on. So he phoned in, there was a phone-in program going on GBN Radio.
That with
In fact,
Eddie Frederick.
Yeah, Eddie Frederick was on the host because Eddie at that time moved from me to GBN. GBN, of course, like I say, the best compliment you could get is for everybody, every radio station could get to read all your stuff. And so they took Eddie. So Eddie was hosting the program. And somewhere along the line, Stanley Charles called in and said, listen, well, I don't know if I should repeat it. Well, yeah, this is gone. And he said, listen, watch. Somebody or the government of Grenada is trying to kill Dr. Fletcher. Cheese and bread. And I suspect Eddie was nervous because, of course, Eddie was taught by me many, many months ago that he has to portray that libel. The idea is to shut the person down, right? Deny it and blah, 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 and go into it. So he knows the technique, but obviously this must have shut the hell out of it because a responsible person like Stanley Charles didn't expect that from. But somewhere along the line, GBN's program is the one which had it. I was doing a sport program at the time. And I figured out, I say, oh, Lord, Stanley Charles in the meantime. I guess you know the story, and a lot of Grenadians know the story, what happened at that time. Dr. Mitchell went on air and he says, serious action could be taken against all the people involved and blah, 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 blah. And I listening to him and I saying, well, all right, well, thank God, that's one time I'm not involved. Lo and behold, I get a summons saying that I am involved in the broadcast of a matter against the whole cabinet. It took me the next 3 years to extricate myself because you know the British legal system. I like to say the British legal system is basically making you guilty because they say justice delayed is justice denied. 3 years it took me, right, for the magistrate to say that, listen, Mr. Roberts, we set aside this matter. You have no business in this matter. But by that time, the damage has been done, dread damage, further damage has been done to Spice Capital Radio by the system, right? Because I was there waiting, and I think the person who handled it at that time was Slim Clouden. And I said, Slim, let's make a deal.
Or Ruggles.
You know? Huh?
Ruggles was involved to some extent, Ruggles Ferguson?
I think Ruggles was involved with a Radio Labbe issue.
Oh, okay.
Right? This one, I decided, well, it was so obviously stupid that a little research by the Attorney General's office or by the police or anybody would have known that I was hosting a sport program during the same period of time that Eddie was hosting that program and this was going on. A little research, legal research, would have done that. So I remember that I think I approached Slim and I said, Slim, right, do me a favor. I don't have any money, right? Can you take this matter up and sue Dr. Keith Mitchell and the whole NNP for $6 million for me, please? And we're going to split the money. I mean, honestly, I had no money. I said, Slim, do that for me, please. And I think it falls through. It just dissipated. And by that time, I said, what the hell? Let whatever happen, happen. This is my calling, and this is what I'm supposed to deal with, the pressure I'm supposed to deal with. Forget it. And I don't think Slim ever followed up on that matter. I know that for the Radio Labbe situation, it was Ruggles Ferguson of Symphony Chambers who handled us because it was a case of sedition. And I think Ruggles Ferguson's father had gone through the same thing with Gary, seditious libel or sedition charges. So basically Ruggles could have related more to that seditious charge by the government against us. And in fact, he subsequently lobbied the media to try to get him to put pressure on the government to remove that old-time 1945 sedition law from our books. But I don't know if it's really as moved. I think it's probably being helped like a sword at Damocles over Grenadians and the media in the future. Y'all make a mistake. Sedition charge in your skin.
Yeah, but at the time, in the case where Dr. Rayford Fletcher and Eddie Frederick's program on GBN, and then subsequently you were slapped with a criminal libel charge.
Criminal libel, yeah.
Right. And it had, as you indicated, huge financial fallouts for you
Mm-hmm.
While at the same time, well, the government was using the state's apparatus in terms of finances and things. This is what.
But precisely that's what I was telling you, nothing will change because this is what a politician can do you. They can just lay a charge. A charge don't have to be, it's called in legal language frivolous and vexatious. They can just lay that charge on you and it will hurt you going straight to the bank, straight to anybody who will give you any help for development. And so the politician could maim a citizen just like that because of the Constitution and how it is put together. In fact, myself and Professor Randy McIntosh had a long chat about that before he died. And Randy McIntosh, in fact, was an older boy to me, I think, in GBSS at that time. And he became the foremost lawyer who specialized in constitutions. And we were talking about the kind of power relative to the laws of the country, Grenada, that these politicians have. And something has to be done, a brand new constitution, not no amendments. This constitution has to be done from the bottom up. Otherwise, the media, one of these days, is either going to put Grenada into serious difficulty with the frivolous nature of broadcasting that's going on, or a politician will sooner or later create the death of a media person in Grenada. It is an accident waiting to happen.
Okay. Paul, even when the NTRC came on board, Spice Capital's radio, it appears, was still battling for survival. Back and forth, correspondence and discussions and negotiations. What were the issues involved at that time?
You mean relative to what? Sorry, I missed the first couple of words you said.
Yeah, relative to the Spice Capital Radio. And I think it was some contractual arrangements with the government at the time. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, some back and forth that was going on between Spice Capital Radio and the government. What was the issue at stake?
Well, what happened there is that we had owed all the stations in Grenada at that time that owed the government of Grenada some monies, and we had to pay them. And I got a letter from Barry Collymore, who was then special advisor to the Prime Minister at that time, saying that the government of Grenada is willing to eliminate much of the monies owed if you would agree to broadcast many of their programs. So I wrote back saying that, okay, yes, I will agree. And in fact, further to that, I think at that time, the NDC won the elections. And so I approached, in fact, the then Minister of Finance saying, listen, I need to rationalize the monies I owe the government of Grenada, sorry. And this is the way Mr. Barry Collymore indicated to it. I have the documentation. I still have the documentation. And so he says, all right, in view of that, what I want you to do is go to the information ministry, go to the information officer, chief information officer, and create a contract in which you will eliminate over a period of time the monies owed to the government of Grenada. The chief information officer, I think, what do you call them? Ray Roberts was at that time the person in charge. So that I sat down with Ray Roberts and we made an agreement which was signed off by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Information. And after about a year and some, I repaid the government the outstanding amount of monies owed them, because don't forget, we went through hell and high water. I had no money to pay license. I had no money to pay that. The government of Grenada took every living cent out of me. So I was glad for the opportunity to be able to pay them back for in lieu of programs. And this is what I did. Up to today, right? We still have the difficulty of, I think the Minister of, Communication and Works, having some communication, because I was told by NTRC that up to this date, the Minister of Communication and Works has not been able to rationalize that aspect of it with the Ministry of Finance. And that's been 10 years now. Okay. So the Minister of Communication and Works is still speaking for all intent and purposes to, in fact, the Ministry of Finance to rationalize whether or not I have paid everything. In the meantime, the official documents, right, is kept by NTRC saying, well, I'm sorry, but we can't issue you this documentation until we get a leeway from the Minister of Communication and Works. And, it's 10 years and counting. So really, what do? Again, politicians have the final say over whether you live or die when you are part and parcel of the media.
Okay. I want to give your part of your brain, I should say, a little rest in terms of the politics and all of that to the media. Let's go into a little sports, Paul, and your involvement in sports. And by the way, a lot of people would have known Paul specifically as a national goalkeeper, but it appears, Paul, that you even dabble in other sports as well.
Oh yeah, well, I had to, like I told you, the story started with basically I freed Ben Roberts. Ben Roberts was a bigger than life individual, and he believed in corporal punishment to the max. Plus, he was a serious disciplinarian, and apart from that, he was an individual who had the total confidence of Eric Mattigeri, period. So I couldn't beat him in boxing, I couldn't fight him. If we go to the courts, he was chief truancy officer, and himself and Mr. Lyle St. Paul were buddies. In fact, he had to report on the truancy, give a truancy report on a regular basis to the court. He was, for all intent and purpose, an officer of the court. He was in charge of the prison. So himself, I do something wrong, I go public. Ben Roberts, I face it right away. He was a commissioner of Her Majesty's prison. Apart from that, GVC, he was also in charge of the mongoose. What the hell? So one thing I had to do, get out of the house and play sport. So what I did, I played first football, I played cricket, with atoms. I played table tennis. I played every possible sport. I ran and I jumped. I used to pole vault, high jump. I played badminton. And later on, when my expertise as a goalkeeper came into operation, I used all these sports to develop myself. I use table tennis for my sight and my footwork. I use badminton for my ability to reach, right? I use even golf. I use a golf ball. So I would go into a four-sided or three-sided place, and I would use the golf ball to go off the walls, and I would develop myself, my speed of thought, speed of reaction. I developed that to a key. It was all, and in those days we didn't have coaches, so you better coach yourself. So I patterned myself off of the great Russian goalkeeper Lev Yashin, and I used to copy a lot of his style and everything else like that. To do that, I had to be first physically fit, and I had to develop and hone in the skills. I used basketball to be able to catch that ball, at the highest point of my leap. So all the other sports, and I talked about 8 of them, were basically there to help me develop football. So this football expertise relative to the national team and being a good goalkeeper, being maybe the best in Grenada at that time, wasn't by accident. It was I eat, sleep, and drank goalkeeping. And so, everything I did, I had a golf ball, I had a sponge ball, which I'd walk down the road with and develop the strength in my fingers. At a certain time, I copied the basketballers. I remember slip between my index finger and my thumb on both hands to grasp the ball a little tighter. That's how serious I took this football. And it paid dividends, although football wasn't a key element. It was radio that was a key element. But that football allowed me to excel, and it gave me the opportunity of going to St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Dominica every year. We go out there. I went to Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados. In fact, it was football which first ensured that I make my first trip abroad, or the various trips that I made abroad. And I remember the final big one, which I made under the auspices of football, was Sampath Harbin. He got together at that time a lot of the top footballers under the guise of going to the United States of America to play football in the States. And I remember I was part of that group. We went to New York, Washington. We went other places and played key teams there. And by the way, just about 4 of us came back. Everybody else stayed. And by the way, I'm talking to a lot of them. I saw a lot of them are hearing me now, who went to the States with a Tyrone Sampert Harbin group of footballers. And the following year, the football level just took a dip, because I think it was about 30 something footballers, top footballers left Grenada. And the creme de la creme of football went with Sampert, and very few of us came back.
And you alluding that was the start of the demise of football then in the 60s or the 70s?
That was into the 70s, because by that time August Uta, I think, came. Yeah, August Uta came and went. Yeah, it was in the 70s. Yeah, Sampert and that movement.
But the level of football and commitment to training and all these things, how do you compare it then to now?
We have all the physical, the physical bits and pieces which enhances training today. I mean, if I could have had what I see today, yesterday, oh gosh, I would have been even better. Because I had to slug. It was a slugfest. It was just blood and guts. It was, come on, you have to be sick. Sometime when you reach home, you can't eat, because of the long trek up the gravel heap to build these rough muscles. And the physical training when you reach home, as we say, if you vomit green, you're not fit. Sometimes because of fitness, we would vomit, that sort of thing. And we didn't know about, things like drinking a lot of water. We just had a drink in between. So it's chalk and cheese relative to the facilities, but the dedication that we had to the sport, oh gosh, forget it. There's no comparing it. And in fact, what changed the whole situation was the advent of the FIFA money. Changed football forever in the 70s, in the 80s, because it was all good in the 70s, great football, in the 70s. But as soon as that FIFA money came down into Grenada in the 80s, and a massive amount of money that came in for us from our perspective, I used to be I had to pay half my airfares to go to play, represent Grenada at the Windward Islands tournament. These guys getting everything, 5-star hotel, the works. And so what happened is that football, because of the money which came from FIFA, turned into not a football game, but an administrator's game. So the administrators got the bulk of the money, and the footballers, up to today, get very, very, very little. But it was topsy-turvy in the 70s. That's massive difference. And I hope I've been able to compare and contrast them.
But won't you agree that the dynamics have changed over the years? So obviously, as you said, the money involved, even in the 80s, the money that was involved is not the type of money that is now, probably in 2020 now, we're talking about, what, $500,000, a year or every quarter or whatever it is. More money involved. Obviously, the argument will be that the dynamics have changed. There will
when you say dynamics, describe that. But I would like to use the word dedication to the sport. It's nowhere there.
Well, it's D&D.
Well, precision, I'm a broadcaster and I'm a journalist too. Precision.
Yeah, but Harold is saying there that as a boy, my favorite soccer team was Atoms. I look forward with excitement to see the likes of George Jackson, Mayer, Slady Douglas, Bertie James, Alistair Telesford, and keeper Paul Roberts, who I idolize. I was always scared that when I went to the park, Paul would not show up, and I will have to settle for Big Belly Boca. Paul is the best goalkeeper I have seen. None has come.
Oh my God!
Some familiar.
City remember that. City remembered that. City remember. Unbelievable. Yeah. In fact, the goalkeeper I took over from in Atoms was actually Boca, Romain. I've forgotten that. Thanks very much, Harold. I forgot that. Yes, I took over from him as a young sap. Very, very, because I had to wait my turn. That's how the rules were. There was, in fact, dog teeth. One called Vesta Constantine, who, in fact, was the national goalkeeper. And I had to sit. And then the second to him was Boca. And then there's this upstart goalkeeper came out at GBSS. But again, I was playing for the national youth team probably around, because I started playing football at 14. The next year, so at 15 years old, I was playing, national football, albeit at the youth level. And yes, I had to sit and let Boca save his couple of last games before I took over. And I got some serious advice from Boca. But again, my style was different. So I guess, it was an era which was passed on. The era was passed, and the baton was passed on to me by Boca. Yeah, Harold is bang on.
Yeah, and Clever Depredine wanted you to speak a little about that individual, Doc Teeth Constantine, as he referred to, undeniably the best goalkeeper in the region, not only Grenada. Philip he was speaking about you, that's Paul Roberts, but then he said Philip from TNT was highlighted as the best, but Harlow in that position rested on Paul. We also had another Doc Teeth Constantine who migrated to Antigua. Can he say something about that individual, if any?
Well, to begin with, Lincoln Phillips from Trinidad and Tobago, and this is one of the individuals who, again, I emulated. I remember. And I have reason to remember that. Like I told you, Ben Roberts was a serious character. And I had sheep, I had goats, and I had a lot of chickens, which I had to take care of. And I remembered Lincoln Phillips, and he saved, Depot, I think he saved for his regiment in those days. And this was a big match in the Queen's Park. Big match. And I had to say at that game, and I don't know what went wrong. I did something wrong. And Ben Roberts decided I am not going to the park. I'm going to, in fact, at that time, Annandale to get grass for the goat and what was again, something for the fowls, and I never attended the match. And by a shame, people, Depot and all of them will tease me. Boy, your father send you for food for the goat and chicken and feed for the chicken. They make me you lose a whole game, but I get laughed at. So yes, I remember the great Lincoln Phillips. Oh gosh, because I think previously, the day before, the the junior team had played, and I remember I met Lincoln Phillips against the regiment with Sharky Henry and these guys, and we had played it, and they had decided that I was going to save to the senior team. I don't know why. Ben Roberts just sent me in the country for grass, and that was, as they say in those days, it was serious embarrassment when you couldn't pass across the wharf while the fellas teasing you. And yes, the other one, I remember Doc Teeth. I again got into school, and Vesta Doc Teeth Constantine was one of the top goalkeepers. Again, to get into the Queen's Park in them days, boy, as a little boy, I used to look at him, really look up to him. I used to have to take his boots and walk in through the door, and he, as a bigger boy, would allow me to go. And I used to always grab Doc Teeth boots to get into the Queen's Park free. And Constantine came here to Grenada after many years, and I tried to remind him of that. He said he can't remember, I said, you remember when I used to grab your boots on the top by the cemetery and walk down Cemetery Hill with you? He said, nah, but I can't remember. I remember having to walk there from Green Street and go down there, but I can't remember that. But yes, he was one of the people who were there before me. And at that time, he moved. Yes, I think he moved to Antigua, or he joined the Jamaican regiment or something like that.
Yeah.
And there's where I just fell into it, yeah.
Ferran Lowe is saying that he migrated to Jamaica. He became the captain of the Jamaican national team at one point.
Yes, I think it was Jamaica he went to. Mm-hmm. Oh, Scara. Good afternoon to you, Scara. Ferran Lowe.
Yeah.
Again, and these are stories you remember. And while we're on football, Ferran Lowe Atoms was one of them individuals who used to occasionally accompany me to some of these. In fact, in Grenville at that time, there used to be a big soft shoe competition. The St. Andrews Football League. Peter Blair and the boys up there had one ongoing competition. In fact, it was almost bigger than GFA competition. And we used to go up there. I played for Ladigue Coast, I remember, the McGuire brothers. If you're in win the game, you win the fight. That was them days. And I could never forget, one of these days I had my little fought here, and Scara decided, that same Ferran Lowe, call him Scara, that way, I'm coming up with you, Pablo, I'm riding with you. and it just stick with me. It was 4 wheels and an engine. And we see in space underneath. Gara said, Lord God, I getting dizzy, boy. That is the craziest ride I ever had in my life. And one of the things, it's one of the things I remember because we went to that very important game. I think it was a final, Cara, I can't remember when you came to Grenville with me. But we played then for Ladique Coast, again, the Bajan team from Ladique. Again, the memories flowing, and as the names come, as you talk about the names, boy, the football memories keep flowing. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, the Riggs now, Anthony the Riggs, saying, I remember Paul grabbing the football with one hand. How he did that.
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, well, Webbing, you forget I told, again, it was a basketballer called Malone or something, Malone, a basketballer in them days. What he did to grab the ball a little bit more to be able to do his dunking, he slipped the webbing between his index finger and his thumb. So I did it for both of mine. And so my ability to just catch the ball, because I never, again, is one of the things that I never did. My style was different. I never let a ball hit my chest, as they say, because I started playing football with these big brown balls and the lace. And a couple of times they would wind you and the lace would imprint on your chest, long after you play the game. So I never like any ball to hit me on my chest. So I would catch the ball out there and bring it in. And in order to do that, I had to cut the webbing on both of my fingers, both of my hands. Cut the webbing between the thumb and the forefinger. It was madness, but God, anything for football in those days.
Yeah, and Paul, I also recall you being the coach of a number of former goalkeepers, including my brother Kurt Mason,
Yeah,
who
good.
became a national junior goalkeeper and senior goalkeeper, and
Mm-hmm.
even your brother Pigeon was also a goalkeeper, a national goalkeeper as well.
Yeah. I remember Little Free, Godfrey Williams.
Right.
In fact, Godfrey Williams is the one himself, and I think it must have been his family, Martin Williams. When I realized that, listen, watch, I needed to hand over. Atoms was doing pretty well, and Cafe Bull Jude Mitchell at that time was doing a fantabulous job with us. He had, in fact, to such an extent that Ashley Ram Folks himself paid us the ultimate, tap on the back. He says, hey, take that Atoms defense team and put it on the national team, and no team could beat us. Pick everybody else from everywhere else, but take that defense. So I'm saying this to say that in that time, the contribution I had made was sufficient, and I had to bow out. So I started to train Little Free, Godfrey Williams, and we kept going at it. And along came Martin Williams. So we used to say one in, one out. I would save this match today. Godfrey would save the next match the next day, until I decided, Godfrey, I think you're good enough. Go for it. And he became the national goalkeeper of Grenada. So I really felt so good I was able to cruise by passing over the baton to an individual who became subsequently the national goalkeeper of Grenada for quite a number of years. I think Godfrey probably listening to us now, and is he in New York? Mike, I think he's in New York, right?
Yeah, that's Free, right?
Little Free, yeah.
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 Okay, so we had Godfrey Williams, and you also had Martin. And by the way,
Martin Williams.
both of them played for Queens Park Rangers. If I may just put a little
Yeah, it was.
in that day. Paul, you had a special skill of diving towards the striker when he entered your area inside the penalty spot and winning possession of the ball at the time he was just about to kick. Always looked dangerous. I presume you worked on that extensively.
Yep, Harold. I mean, that was something I practiced over and over and over and over, because what was happening is that we had some dangerous kickers, like for instance Sampat Harbin. He was Mr. Accurate.
Yeah.
When he lifted his head and he puts the ball exactly where he wants. We had Dia Marquez, who had a strange gait when he ran out. And one of the individuals who I practiced with was from Queens Park Rangers also. He's a Medford, Baker Medford.
Baker, yeah.
I couldn't let these guys shoot. So what I would have to do is, what they would do, they would shake to the left and move right. And it's again, it is speed of thought and execution. I did this in tennis. I did it in basketball. I did this in badminton. So everything I did, it was part and parcel of the footballing regime. So I trained to pick this ball up off the feet because I couldn't let these guys put a full-fledged shot on me at that, distance. So yes, I perfected. It was something I worked on incessantly. In fact, Godfrey, I think, Williams tried to do it, but I think he was a little bit slower than I was in getting there. But he was a good goalkeeper. Mm-hmm. But again, he didn't have the background that I had. I played every possible ball game, speed game, and I enhanced the ability to telepathize information between my brain and my hand, my brain and my leg, my brain and my feet. So really, and plus I did, like I say, pole vaulting, and I learned how to land on my feet and not break my neck and that sort of thing. Pole vaulting at 10 feet high in the air, you've got to, and in sand, so you've got to be pretty accurate and you've got to train and train. Yes, I will. A lot of training went into taking that ball off these guys' feet.
What you can say or recall of the Harold Flash Williams, another Williams again, and the late Bob Hope, as Clev and others will say, they also were, good goalkeepers.
Yeah, Flash Williams was a pretty looking goalkeeper. He was very quick. Very, very quick. His reflex action. Again, Harold played most games like I did. He was ambidextrous, playing left and right hand, table tennis, badminton. We played the little ball game. So our ability was a little bit better than now.
And Flash was a wicket keeper, cricket.
And plus he was, oh my God, yes, he was a wicket keeper. So he had sight and he was able to anticipate. And so he was different. Bob Hope was a person who perfected the angles. And so half the time, you would hardly find Bob Hope doing very much diving. He's always there. He perfected the angle and actually forced you to kick to him, and that was his strength. But he was always there. Yeah, two very good goalkeepers that passed through Grenada, but various strengths in their art form.
Okay, let's leave that there for a while and go into a part of broadcasting, sports broadcasting, because in our conversation prior to the interview, you spoke about Wibs but then Radio Grenada's involvement in sports broadcasting in the 70s. Paul, then there was not what we have now in terms of technology. How was that done then?
All right. Remember that I guess Ray told you that. Ray Roberts. When we decided to do this thing, I had to have some help. Ray Roberts came in from the Ministry of Sport and came to work with the station, I think full time. And what we did in planning, we created what was called a Saturday Sports Special. And we identified areas. If there was cricket, we identified a ground which the main game would take place from. And we would drop at the time what was called outside broadcast line, an OB line. It was just a telephone line which was patched into the station. So we would drop one in the Queen's Park. If there's going to be a big game in Grenville, St. Andrews, for instance, we drop one there. If there's going to be a next big game in Victoria, we drop one there. And we always do it via telephone. So what we call an OB line. And we would have someone who would basically link them all together. So we would say at probably 1 o'clock, they go across to Ray Roberts at the Queen's Park, and Ray Roberts does commentary and his team does commentary for half an hour. And then we say, well, all right, it's time now to join Harold Parisady in St. Andrews, and Harold would be there waiting for us. And then we would say, well, a big match by that time, 4 o'clock, it's going to be a big match between Guelph, Victoria. So let's go to St. John's in Guelph, and that's how we did it. And in between, we'd have interviews and chats with individuals. Ray Roberts basically coordinated a lot of that. We used to call that Saturday Sports Special. I think it's something that you call. Hey, I think you stole that name from us, No,
but when we carried on with the Saturday Sports Special at GBN as well. Yeah. it was
Yeah,
then.
Saturday Sports
Yeah,
Special.
myself and Eric Sion and Owen Simon and others continued with the Saturday.
Oh, good. Well, it was a continuation of. I
Yeah.
thought, all right, yes, because that was the name of it, Saturday Sports Special. And bars, sports from all over. We go to play table tennis. We would go to Belmont area, and if there's a phone, and this is what I need to tell you, with giant 2 wires, we had a long line. I think Ray might remember that. We had a cable, and so what we do, we would join a telephone and ask the people the people in the house, in the various houses close to Belmont, whether or not they would allow us to use the telephone for a couple of minutes. And we'd run this big line straight into the table tennis hall, and we'd commentate on table tennis and then bring back the lady's phone for her.
Yeah.
And because we dial into the station, we had a dial-up system, and boy, that worked like hell. And we brought sports from all over the country.
I laugh because, you know, the OB line, as we call it, as Harold will rightly say, but then
Yeah.
you had Ashley Heinzo and Chris Batista.
Oh, Heinzo, yeah.
Right.
Heinzo was
And
key.
I always recall this OB line in borrowing phones from people used to be problematic. I recall going and do football, secondary school football, a lot of years ago in the countryside, and we got permission from the person to use their phone. At that time, they had call waiting, you know. So sometimes when you have the call waiting, you hear the peep peep on the line.
Beep, beep.
Somehow,
Yes, I remember that.
Somehow, this person was not told that the broadcaster was using the phone to do this thing, this broadcast. Someone came home the afternoon, it was from some school person, came home, picked up the phone, make a call, dial the number, realized that was a broadcast, and started speaking, and it was...
You didn't know he was going off live.
We had to cut the broadcast because of what was being said on the phone at the time. But it was all the laughter in terms of what we went through in terms of broadcasting and the OB line and borrowing from the neighbor and things like that. So, but it was all fun. But I'm glad you mentioned that because
let me mention one of the persons we have. In fact, two people we have to really pay tribute to as you talk about that. In Grenville, we had in fact someone who, at the time, the station had decided. Listen, he was giving us regular reports coming down from Grenville, and that was Peter Blair. So Blair was given a phone in his house, and Blair would send reports on an ongoing basis from there. The other person we used to use a lot in Carriacou, because we had a Carriacou hookup too, was Milton Coy. Milton Coy was send us sports from Carriacou. And Ray Roberts, by the way, had one of the programs which you call, I think it was Sports View, which he used to have every day. I think it was 12. I suspect Ray might remember that. 12, in which we covered just about every subject matter that's of any sport matter, which was an issue or which needed looking at in a very critical way. Ray became a household name for that program, Sport View.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to see that I didn't really have to go into my question banks because I'm getting some very good assistance there. And thanks, Margaret, because it was one of my questions up. But Paul, what are your thoughts on the state of sports reporting and local sports coverage in Grenada today? And how do you think it can be improved?
Yeah, well, it's atrocious, and very atrocious, Margaret. Bad. And again, and it brings us back to the whole question. Margaret, you always put me in trouble. Right? You always put me in trouble. Now, recently, in fact, a year and a half ago, we decided to change this whole approach, and the president at the time, Chenny Joseph, decided that he was going to put a lot of money into developing just that thing, Margaret, trying to put sport all throughout Grenada. And one of the things was to use a computer under the auspices of the GFA, and in fact use that computer with other material, with other instrumentation, to go into all the various areas to develop, in fact, the sport commentary from various parishes and to teach individual the commentators method. I spoke to Cherry in details and everything else like that. And let's not go into all the mundane details, but I got $20,000 from the Grenada Football Association, and when they bought a lot of equipment, and because of the supposed debacle which subsequently happened, we were unable to put that plan into fruition. Otherwise, that would have been able to kick sport off generally. Well, football first off, but the plan was to, when there's cricket season, the GFA would be able to make income from renting the system to cricketers, to basketballers, to whichever sport. So it would be a sporting development contributed by the Grenada Football Association. That was the big plan when I went abroad to chat with that 20,000 US Bascom. The equipment sat there, and I suspect it's gone to the dogs now. But that was the plan.
But that was a plan then. So how do you think we can fix what we are seeing now in terms of the lack thereof of proper sports coverage in Grenada?
Well, there needs to be, I don't think it could be done or should be done from an individual radio station or television standpoint. I think if somebody like Michael Bascom can come back to Grenada, form himself into a sport organization with the various equipment and specialist in sport dissemination. No, it has to be a private enterprise. It cannot be allowed to be dealt with by the various stations because of the nature of the station. So yes, we need some professional sporting organization to be able to bring sport again to the various parishes. It can happen, because we've got a lot of footballers out there, a lot of names. We see what has happened, what sport could generate once people hear about it. Hear about the people who are playing table tennis, hear about that person who's a sprinter. You see what happens for what? 3 days, 2 days in intercard. All we do is replicate that, Margaret, and I suspect Bascom, if he would take the responsibility of doing that, what happened with, in fact, National College broadcast, how everybody dropped everything and grab a radio or go in front of a television to listen to them youngsters run, we would be able to do that, seeing the youngsters also play football, cricket, table tennis, everything else like that. And that could resuscitate the interest of sport nationwide. That's the only thing that can be done, but it has to come from a professional organization.
Okay. Well, probably I can use this platform, Paul, to throw it in your court that you probably can start something in Grenada, and the platform is there in terms of having something virtual. It's just having the commitment of those, yourself. I'm sure Harold and Toro and others will want
listen, man. Ask Harold Paisidi. You could tell him I'm old man. I have to pass the baton on. So I think it needs.
No, but your input.
That's like your younger guys with the kind of verve and energy level. It has to be like how we did it in the past. It was sheer energy of youth. It was a sheer wanting to do it because we were young people and we were excited over something. You need to have young people take over this whole concept of nationalizing sport from a media standpoint.
But how can we do that to excite the young ones, especially if, because it seems, Paul, that it may have to be, as you indicated, on an individual level, because radio stations, the media in particular, media houses, don't seem to be interested in developing, sports broadcasting, sports reporting, local sports coverage.
This again, back to what I said, it has to be a private concern because we're moving into the 21st century. We're into the 21st century. So what was before cannot be now. So it needs to be a private company with initial funding put into it, because I suspect that somewhere along the line, the sponsorship will come with the interest of the broadcasting of the sport. Again, I need to tell you, there's a strange story which I need to tell. Way back when I had ran into a problem, like I tell you, I was a problem child. I was a major problem child. And so I had decided that I was walking off the national team, and I thought I was bigger than the sport, that sort of thing. And I was working then at Jonas Brown and Hubbard. Margaret St. John, Roy St. John, went to Hubbard, my boss, at that time, Mr. Fred Toppin, and said, listen, we need Paul Roberts to go to St. Vincent because there's a game which is very, very important in St. Vincent. and we need him there. Tapping walked down from main office to, if you know, right by the basketball court on the carronage, and he says to me, Mr. Roberts, listen, I hear you're a national goalkeeper and you're creating some difficulty. Now I have a car waiting for you. You're going to go to the airport. Or if you don't go to the airport and represent Grenada, don't come back to my work tomorrow. And I remember going to St. Vincent. I didn't have very much to do. We won the game at that time. That changed my approach to, in fact, sport totally. You know why? Because there's Fred Tapping, right? The man was at the top of in fact, the business community.
Business, yeah.
Yeah, we had, and what I discovered later on, much later on, is that these two people, I don't know if it was done by both of them or which one, but either Huggins or Hubbard came together to charter that flight. It was so important that Grenada won the Windward Islands football tournament. I found myself on a plane with two pilots and two stewardesses going to St. Vincent, and this was done by the business sector. You see what the business sector can do once they're activated. And I'm saying, I think it's there. The goodwill is there. It is a professional organization which TalkSports needs to access that. It happened in the past, and I don't see why it can happen again.
So would you say, outside of Paul the troublemaker and the sportsman, it was through your sports broadcasting, involvement in sports media, that propelled you into what you are today?
Oh yeah, certainly. And sport much more than radio, because I try on radio, like even today, I don't say my name. So when I say, and that's the end of the news, I don't say my name, simply because in those times, it was a case of radio Lilac Hell, Radio Geary, Grenada United Labour Party, Radio Grenada United Labour Party, Radio Devil. So when I read the news, I never said my name. So really, no one really knew me. They knew a voice, but they didn't know who I was. No one knew who I was in radio. But it was in sport that people get to recognize my expertise and who I was. So yes, sport is a thing which catapulted me into all sorts of, popularity in Grenada. Yep, sport did it.
All right. And Harold is saying that if the government wants to subsidize a radio station to cover sports like it was done by Radio Grenada and Radio Free Grenada, then it can be done. If not, it has to be a Kerry Parker with a Paul Roberts, Ray Roberts mentality to do it. Private enterprise with lots of money to run the business. I see no other way.
Yeah, well, radio station. Harold, I see your point, but that's the radio station ownership is the traditional approach. I'm saying once you're a proper production element, so that you eliminate the transmission aspect of, in fact, the work. So what you do is you have 3 producers, and these producers work on producing sport, and all radio stations and all TV stations. And this is where I've come to it brings me back to the whole concept, right, of, in fact, the NTRC. It sounds critical, but the National Telecommunication Regulatory Commission comes into this. They should be allocating, when a station gets a license, there are about 25 stations in Grenada, and not one of them has a terms of reference to bring at least 2 hours in sport on a weekly basis. You have to deal with the development of your country. And so I always critique the National Telecommunication Regulatory Commission for not taking that position. They will say, hey, we're operating under 2000 legislation. But that legislation was done without the input of broadcasters and people who know what they're talking about. It was a legislation was just done with legal parameters attached to it and punitive measures. Not very much developmental additives were put into that 2000 legislation. And that is what the NTRC is operating. So again, you see, we have to change that. We have to make it a must for radio stations to play KSO. There's certain content. We have to make it a must for sport to be broadcast. And that is when, they must participate in putting at least, let's say, half an hour per day in sport. Now, if you look at the BBC, this is what the BBC does. BBC decided, what the hell, Michael Jackson, all of them coming and take over, pop culture coming and take over this thing. No. They said part and parcel of your license issued by the DTI, the Department of Trade and Industry in Britain, says that you must play at least 1 hour, right, on a daily basis, wherever, for classical music. That's their culture. And we have to implement that in these small countries. And that is where NTRC comes in. And so this law is really outdated, and it doesn't reflect development. It all only reflects people paying for something. It must be developmental, and the 2000 statutes and legislation is out of whack. No broadcaster takes that seriously as a developmental tool.
So are you saying that even in that statute, there isn't anything regarding sports broadcasting? It's just about, as you say, just giving some guidance to the NTRC, but nothing as it relates, because you indicating that the NTRC is taking guidance from that 2000 legislation.
Yeah, and there's nothing really which makes an allocation as sport. There's nothing which makes an allocation of the indigenous music, meaning, and again, I know that because Spice Capital Radio had a rule that local force. So before we play a Trinidad Calypsonian, we have to play one of our own, and then we could play a Trinidad Calypso. So we had rules and regulations relative to developing what's ours. This 2000 legislation doesn't do anything, doesn't put us as priority. And they allow the stations, that's why you're here, the majority of stations have, in fact, adopted a particular type of music to be played 24/7, but only around the carnival time. They, in fact, play with the kind of frequency that should be played our local artists. So our local artists are seasonal. That's dangerous. And even the British and the Americans in their own way, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, they tell you clearly there's an allocation, there's a division of, in fact, how you allocate programming. They tell you what to do. We are the only one who say, carte blanche, play what you want, do what you want, And this is what me and Stanley Charles were hinting at. You have to legislate, right? In the first instance, you've got to legislate how the day's broadcast is broken up and what you expect, and give different classes of license. I see they have classes, but the classes are monetary recompense for particular areas. It has nothing to do with development of culture, development of sport, development of self, of the individual. So that's the problem, and that's the major problem I have with the NTRC at this point in time. They don't have a guidance there into how they operate and why they operate as a valued organization at this point when there are almost 25 to 30 different radio stations in Grenada. That's dangerous. One of these days you're going to run into trouble.
Okay. Well, I'll throw this out to you, and probably we can always, develop it at some stage. But yourself and Ray and Harold and Toro and even Margaret, to an extent, we can probably get together sometime virtually and see if we can help those who have an interest in sports broadcasting, sports report, sports coverage, somehow or some way, to see what we can do to assist. But before we go on to another thing, Randy Glean, that's Roland, was making a point earlier when we were talking about the past goalkeepers. He also referred to John Williams, another Williams from Hurricane this time.
Hurricanes. Oh, yes, he was a good goalkeeper.
Also, Alistair Romain, who I think is based in Canada, and played for Dauntless, and I think Rangers as well, Park Rangers. And said Bull Sullivan, who played for St. John Sports. You remember Bull? I think Bull was the
stamping. Yes, I remember Bull. He left us a couple of years ago, but oh my God, yes, he was
the stamping goalkeeper.
Sorry?
Was he known as the stamping goalkeeper?
Yeah. In fact, he was, again, I like to say blood and sand, because there was the days when, in fact, you had imagine you have Telesford, and it's a Telesford coming at you, and Bull is standing in the goal, and it is Atoms versus St. John Sports. Well, you know what has to happen. Bull have to take you out. Bull can't stand up there and let Alistair Telesford take a shot at him. And so Bull developed that stature of coming outside of his goal and intimidate the striker. And he used to do that very successfully for St. John Sports. Yeah, I remember him well.
All right. Let's go into now, Paul. How you got involved in GFA administration? And you will talk about how you get in, and at some point you have to let us know how you got out, how you bowed out.
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, after I decided that, listen, watch, now it's time to play over 40 and to just watch football develop. I was in Tantine one day, and I'm not going to call names because I talked to the guy, and he said, listen, watch, you don't have to call my name, so I'm not going to call his name. But he was a member of the General Council of the Grenada Football Association, and they were having some difficulty. In fact, by that time, the 80s had come around, and FIFA money was coming down like a ton of bricks, and I suspect very many of the new administrators were not spending it properly. And I was asked to go into the Grenada Football Association, particularly to identify, right, the alleged disappearance or usage of $59,000 by one, the General Secretary. Well, I wonder if I should call his name, boy. Well, yeah, because I don't think it's basically negative. It's a perception of Victor Daniels, handling $59,000. I was told to go in and deal with the situation.
And it was all alleged at the time, right?
Alleged, the allegation. So I went in and I looked around, and I became part of the executive. I was, voted in. And so I started an investigation, journalistic investigation, asking questions, going into the office, looking at how business was done, blah, blah, blah. The usual approach, learning everything about the Grenada of the GFA. And subsequently, I discovered that, listen, something is wrong somewhere. So I decided to bail the cat. So I called Victor Daniel himself. I said, Victor, what? Come. This is the allegation about you. What going down? He says, what are you talking about? He says, this is not what happened. And I keep pressing him. And Daniel eventually was able to expose to me. And because I suspect at this time he wouldn't want me to talk about how I knew, but he gave me serious evidence of where he accesses his money, how he accesses his, because he has a sports store. And when I said, oh my God, I said, well, everybody been barking up the wrong tree. And Daniel was able to show me some serious information and point me into a particular direction where I started to look, and I discovered for myself a lot of hanky-panky. It was about 10 members. So I went back to the members and I said, guys, this is what I discovered. Daniel is not involved. Daniel doesn't need GFA money. Daniel has his business organized from abroad. In fact, Daniel deals directly with Fubo and all these big companies. So Daniel is getting stuff at a reduced prices because he deals high up. So Daniel has nothing to do with this so-called $59,000. And I don't know how much they believe because I didn't give them any physical evidence, but I saw the physical evidence and I was convinced that Daniel was not involved. But at the same time, in looking, I discovered that, wow, a lot of strange things were happening. And I tried to address it. And I got into, as usual, and that's why I get into problems in the GFA. I try to correct the situation. I really tried to correct the situation. And I was attacked. In fact, one of the individuals tell me, hey, watch, you got to be on know which side you're on, You got to know which side you're on. I remember there was an issue in which part and parcel of the corruption, which I looked at, and corruption in different areas. There was this special course going, and it was going to one of the esoteric countries given by FIFA. And I remember there was Happy Hill. Happy Hill had just come out. And there's this youngster was all energies. And so we were sitting around the executive table and I say, listen, guys, let's see if we could develop club football and the individuals within the club. Let's break the mold and ask Happy to represent his club in going and deal with this management of clubs, course that was going on. One of the executive members turned around and said, Pablo, you're crazy. Well, they all laugh at me. They say, Pablo, you're crazy? So I'm an executive member, so why you leave for me? That individual went to a club development program, and he's not associated with a club. He was just an executive member, and he's not in even the management of the club. That was a level of nonsense. So the footballer himself was getting nothing. After I discovered this thing and there was a lot of vicious backward and forward, I resigned. I resigned from the Grenada Football Association. And then, of course, I decided that I was going to be part and parcel of General Council. I thought I could get more, because you know what it is when you're a member of executive member of a group. You have to hush your mouth because the group make the decision, although you're not agreeing with it. So I said, I want freedom to be able to talk and to deal with the situation. I went to General Council representing FootGov. And I decided to see if I could do something again, change rules, regulation. I became part and parcel of the statutes body, and try to change the rules to really try to get the players themselves more value from football, because football then was only of value to the administrators. The funds was coming down. But somewhere along the line, I ran into problems with at the elections. I remember it was one of the elections which Chelly Joseph, myself, and Ashiram folks were up for, election. I lost out on the first round. So I told everybody, I said, listen, watch, let me tell you something. Ram has more experience, let's deal with Ram, right? And I remember one person calling our names clearly. Blair said, listen, Pablo, no. It could be Dinah, y'all, I can't deal with Ram. I don't want to vote for Ram. I'm voting for Cheney. I say, all right, your choice. Because he had personal, problems with him. Ram, however, won, because when I worked the mathematics, Ram would win. Before the vote came, I said, Ram, what are you going to do is, you see this problem we have with Daniel. Daniel is not involved in any hanky-panky. In fact, it's on the contrary. The GFA owes Daniel a lot of money. So stay clear, stay off Daniel's station. Immediately after winning, Ram GBN comes up to and sticks a microphone and said, what will be the first thing you'll be doing? What Ram says, are we taking matters, are we having an investigation into the disappearance and the corruption that's taking place in the Grenada Football Association and the General Secretary? I say, Ram, we just agree. What's that? Ram eventually decided that he throwing me aside, because he then became the president of the Grenada Football Association. And I was representative of FootGov. Now, FootGov is Nat Simpson. And how he had a problem, he fired Nat Simpson as the coach. He fired Peter Blair as the manager. And I take up arms. And so I decided, now, Ram, you have to go. I take off the glove and I take off at Ram. And I was able to outmaneuver him and get the backing of FIFA, right? At one of the meetings in Brazil to remove the complete Ashley Ram folks executive. Ashley Ram folks today remains bitter with that. But it was a political fight because he did something wrong, right? Like I said already, I told him, I said, listen, watch, let me tell you something. I know about Niccolo Machiavelli. And you are Machiavelli. You're an exact replica of that. You're joking, man. You cannot, on the one hand, say you're developing football and you're firing the best coach in Grenada at the time, Nat Simpson. Cannot do that. Nat went out in the cold for a long time until I think Chelly Joseph came back into operation afterwards, after Ram was moved out, and we went into a kind of receivership administrated by by Mr. Maguire, who was then Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Chelly Joseph was voted in, the person to run the association, and Chelly Joseph, up to today, is still there. That was the story of my involvement. When I realized the situation, when the new dispensation came, I found myself being vice president to Cheney. I said, well, Cheney, I'm not in this thing, And this I honestly tell him, I said, watch, now I mean it's no jacket and tie nonsense, and go and talk, and nothing coming out of it. I need to deal with this. He said, oh, Pablo, stay around, stay around. I decided to stay around for about a year. And then all kind of magic started to happen with the money. The money increased now. And then I started to see all kind of magic, and now go to identify any particular person at this point. But serious corruption, and I was getting scared, right? I already asked Mr. Maguire, who was previous president, to make sure that the Grenada Football Association came into a limited liability company so that nobody could come into my house when they find wrongdoings and take my fridge and stove and everything else like that. So that was done. But when I realized what was going on, I said, no, I ain't taking no more chance. I didn't have anything to do. So I stepped out. I resigned for the second time. I decided there's no way I'm going back there. And Rado Griffith took over. And Rado Griffith ended up almost 5 years in court with the Grenada Football Association. So I was able to step out in time before whatever hit the fan. That's the story of my involvement in the Grenada Football Association up to today.
So you're saying that the Grenada Football Association is ripe with allegations of corruption, allegations of whatever it is you call it. But you made mention of Ram folks bitter with you, but you all remain friends, it appears.
Oh yeah. But it was, put it this way, it was a friendly bitterness. It was basically, I mean, like for instance, myself and Ram, one thing with all others, there was no personal attacks, right? It was ideas. We battled ideas, and we all shake hands. And he would, who used to call me? Who used to call me? He say, "Boy, you're a," oh, I forget it. Some funny name he used to call me, meaning that I'm a person who you never know what you're going to do next. I say, Ram, that is because you're Machiavelli. You're trying to control Machiavellian. I say you're trying to control everything, and everybody must listen to you. No, you're no, Ram. My father was like you, right? And I know how to deal with y'all. So I respect you a lot. But hey, don't forget, just like they say, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to the facts. Remember that. I remember me and Ram used to have these ongoing battles, and it was a good fight. But subsequently, other people, not subsequently, other people, it was vicious and personal, and so I just bowed out.
Well, I had Ram folks on the program last week, and just as how you happened to mention about Ram folks, the name Paul Roberts was mentioned as well, and I want you to hear what Ram had to say. Your pal, your best partner, Paul Roberts, will be on the program. So obviously you will take some notes, and I know you will have to come back and rebut at some stage. You know?
No, I wouldn't rebut. I'll tell you the honest truth. Paul is my partner. As much as he campaign, he go in the country to get out Ram. But you have to watch Paul. Paul is my partner and will remain my partner. I know Paul a long, long time. There's no goalkeeper in the history of Grenada reach close or anywhere near to Paul Roberts' ability. But Paul is use anti preceding Paul name. Paul opposes everything. But ask him for one solution to a problem. One. I like Paul. Paul is the one that wasn't afraid. He's a brave guy. He's not afraid to do anything or to say anything and whatnot. But from a development standpoint, has he ever worked with any club? Has he ever worked with any player? Has he ever found a job for an unemployed person? Has he ever helped a family to get out of their poverty or their situation? No. He's a loner. Paul Roberts is a loner that his role is to mash down. And he's my partner. But this is who is Paul. And if Paul hear Ram saying that, Paul will say, this son's a Ram. But Ram, blah, blah, but Ram is my partner. You understand? Yeah, this is Paul. I have been in forums with Paul already, and Paul would look at the things that are negative, sometimes justifiably so. But I will ask Paul, what is the solution? He's not interested in a solution. He points out what he thinks, the things that he thinks are wrong. And we can't live without bringing solutions to problems.
Quite a lot from your pal, Paul.
Yeah, well, that's Ram. Like I tell you already, Ram is. I mean, in Daddy Beaks in school, he used to teach us. I remember he introduced me to that. He says, gentlemen, you must have heard about Niccolo Machiavelli. And we had to study the prince and study methodology. Ram is a page out of Machiavelli principle. I mean, the Machiavelli principle. This is who he is, right? This is who he is, you know. And like I said already, Ram is entitled to his own opinion, but he's not entitled to the facts. And if he would look at the facts and do some research, but of course, like I tell you already, he's who he is. He's Machiavelli.
But is it
Machiavelli, and he can't help it. He has to deal with that. You know how he said? Paul's my friend, on the one hand. So he accustomed to duplicity. I mean, well, that's his nature. He's a politician. Politicians are by their very nature duplicitous. So he is as living example of, a politician, and he's into politics, and he's a bit annoyed that I was able to beat him to it, so to speak. Some stupid guy on the side of the street just come out there. He never anticipated I would have been able to do all that work, because it was a lot of work to remove him. I had to work with CONCACAF, I had to work with CFU, I had to work with FIFA, I had to work with in fact, the General Secretary of FIFA. So I had to work with two vice presidents of FIFA just to deal with Ram, and I did it. Write all the letters, deal with all the bits and pieces. So he probably is upset that I was able to go so far, because you see, he had ensconced himself in the system. He ain't listening to nobody.
But
and he's a mild narcissist too, so he don't listen.
Do you have any regrets?
Huh?
Do you have any regrets about doing that?
You mean about Ram?
Yeah.
No, it was time we move on. People like me and Ram move on and move over to Cheney and them fellas. Even if they make a mess, they go clean it up. But it's time we move out of that kind of football, because what we were doing with the money wasn't right. And if other people do it, let them get caught. But we mustn't be part of that. We were part of the developmental role of the footballer. You must talk about the footballer, not the administrator that it is today. GFA, and I always look at this. And it sounds critical, but this is how, in fact, younger people think, and it's up to them to deal with it. That you have a building, a Grenada Football Association, tree-structured building, in the same vicinity, right, of two massive building, which is there for sport. You understand what it is to upkeep a building? The continued amount of money which is needed for electricity, this, that. In fact, all the taxes involved with owning your own building. We hadn't reached a stage yet to do that, because when you reach that stage of having this massive building, what about the footballer? What about the clubs?
Is that a critique of the Cheney Joseph administration?
Not necessarily only Cheney Joseph, because this was a dream by a lot of people long before. And I used to argue that even when I was an exec, I said, we had to deal with priority. What you doing? You're dealing with football development, or you're dealing with stone and mortar? Make up your mind. In terms of reference of the 1924 establishment of the Grenada Football Association with development of footballers. Read it. It's as old as time. Sandy Taylors and all them boy and them sit down, and they know what they were doing when they formulated the Grenada Football Association. But simply because of our influx of a little bit of money, it's like a child getting some money and you're spending it like mad. This is the problem I had even before Cheney, that these guys wanted to take the money and do all kind of magical thing and forget the footballer. That is my major problem, because I remember myself, I didn't have no money. I had to spend money to go and play GFA football, right? I didn't have gear. I didn't have a lot of times. I mean, it's Ben Roberts. We had a lot of us are wanting to eat. I was hungry. I didn't have nothing. I didn't have a proper diet. I had to go on fish and them kind of thing for myself. I remember me. And I feel the money must be spent on footballers in the main. We had 2 stadia there. There's no reason, as far as I see, for putting that there. Another problem I had with the Grenada Football Association was what made me resign. FIFA gave us money for development. I say, hey guys, the money is for the development of football in Grenada. We take half the money and we pay all them people from Germany, France, Grenadian families. They even know where Grenada is, and we're paying them to represent Grenada. So what y'all doing? So what happened to the guy from Sauters who catching his skin? What happened to the fella from Queen's Park Rangers? What happened to the 100 player? They get nothing. They ain't given a chance of development. And I get upset. That is one of the things which I'm saying, that the money come, but it didn't reach the footballers. It reached the administrators of football. They look good. They look developmental. But hey, go and watch a game and you go to see that no money, technically no money, has trickled itself down to the individual footballer. They still derelict. They still had nothing to eat when time comes. They themselves could afford a doctor bill. And that is what broke me. I just walk away because I can't change it.
But that
this
is
thing go from right up. I can't change it.
And
I tried, but I failed. Failed badly. I'm right. I failed.
And as a preface to what Toro is actually saying, how do you compare the quality of football, that's Grenada football, 1970s and 80s versus today? I think that is what you're alluding to in terms of it's not trickling down to the development of football.
Yeah. The quality of Grenada football, per se, is deteriorating dramatically. The skill level is very high, right? You see a lot of more skillful footballers than us. But what we did with the ball in 1970 was something positive. These guys, they're skilly. But what are the results, is skillful masturbation. They ain't producing nothing at the end of it all.
Okay, and Clem is asking, are the officers outside of the president paid a salary or given a stipend? How often a financial report is given? And is it available to the public?
Well, yes, it is. In fact, and that is one of the things. It is available. You have officers outside of the presidency, and that is, and yes, you call it's not a stipend, Depo is not a stipend. It is a salary, right? You're talking about $8,000 per month for probably the general secretary, or maybe more, because that is kept back. In fact, one of the reasons when I was a member of the executive general council, I got up as an owner of football and said, listen, I'd like to find out how much it is that was paid to the general secretary. And I was referring then to the individual who they brought back hoping to have done something, Ambrose Phillip. And the president got up and said, that is private information. I am a shareholder. And the person who I hire, sitting as president, telling me that information is private, it can't be divulged to me. That is a level of insult. That is a level of what happens in the GFA. A lot of it is hidden. But yes, therefore, a lot of them people have are paid. You have, for instance, a competitions manager now. I suspect he's in excess of $5,000. You have quite a number of positions there, and and I suspect the bill is massive. I don't go to general council meetings again, so I don't know.
Out of clarification, I believe that I'm subject to correction, but the competitions manager, I think, is from the Ministry of Sports. So I think it's some arrangement with the government of Grenada, seconded. I should use the word seconded.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the salary is being paid by I'm subject to correction by the government.
All right. Well, basically, I'm not.
Yeah, but going back
I'm not certain about the present person, but I knew that in those days that was a secret.
Right, and going back to the point, Paul, is that you're not making, and just out of clarity, and I want you to do the clarification, you're not making any direct allegations that persons within the GFA are involved in corruption, money, this, that, and the other. It's just that you're saying that quote unquote mismanagement in terms of the players or football development is not getting its fair share in terms
Yeah.
of the money that is allocated to the GFA?
No, you know what I've been more direct. I would come and see them fellas thieving money. You know, thieving going on as such. Thieving is when you take the money and you put in your pocket for your own ends. I'm talking about it is not broadening its concept into bringing in the players of the game, right? The players of the game. Like I gave you an example of Happy Hill, where I try to say, well, listen, let's instead of the executive going to all of this stuff, pull a president from a club. Put one of the guys who've been contributing like mad to football and building up these clubs. And because clubs in Grenada are not really clubs, they are teams where one and two men take the brunt of the load, push their hand in their pocket, do all the work. I mean, I know I was in foot golf and I saw the situation with Nat Simpson. Nat Simpson half salary were going into development like football. You had to buy balls, you had to buy the stuff. I watched Rado Griffith. I walked from St. George's already. Not St. George's, from St. David's, right, to Grenville, trying to raise funds and ask people for $1 all the way just to pay, affiliation fee to the GFA. I had all the that's what we had to do. Why $10 million running wrong? I'm sorry, I can't rationalize that.
So the question, Paul, we're getting ready to wrap up the big $10 million question, therefore, or $1 million question. How do we rectify this problem? I know you say you have bowed out, you're now out of football administration, but it appears that every time you say that and you see these things happening, Paul, you're urged to get back and get involved. How do you see with rectifying these problems or these areas that you have identified?
But this, you see, the problem is, what is a fish rotten from the head? What could I do if there is the rules and regulations of FIFA? I'm just a little fish. Now, if it was happening in the Grenada Football Association as an isolation activity, I had no problem. Oh, of course, I'm going to back 11 individuals right to the end. But this is not a Grenada thing. This is bigger than Grenada, bigger than me. Come on, look at the $40,000 question. And I rationalized it. You know, a vice president of the Grenada of FIFA could call the president of the Grenada Football Association to Trinidad, right? And offer him $40,000 and say, use it as you see fit. He comes back to Grenada and he tries to use it as he see fit, never mind what it is. And then all of a sudden, the vice president is corruption. And that I was telling, that's one of the arguments I said, Chelly, tell them people that they give you $40,000. What are you bothering about? You ain't do nothing. This man just call you out of the blues and tell you come and drive a couple of you all day. And the man, Benjamin give you $40,000. Well, thank you. Declare it to the Grenada Football Association and start to spend the money for football. Big deal. Whoever, these are multi-billionaires, but you see where it starts? I can't do anything about it. So if it changes in my lifetime, I'm going back and help develop football, but there's nothing I could do. And because I tried, but I failed miserably. That is what Ram is right. I failed because I couldn't do nothing. This stuff is way back in FIFA. I can't do nothing and $500,000 every year. Come on, how could be that? How could change that?
But do you think that yourself and Ram and others still have something to give to the development of football administratively, not directly involved, but by way of probably an advisory role or something like that, sir?
I don't know. This thing is it's inundated. Listen, we now have a situation where there are FIFA development officers for the Caribbean region. You understand what's going on there? Allocation of money is given based on, in fact, what they perceive, right? And in fact, they themselves are questionable because you could just do so and open a grassroots program and you get maybe $20,000 to put towards it. But is the grassroots program a continuous one? Is it really doing very much? So it's a showbiz operation we have in the Caribbean, relative to development of football. And it's reflected all through the Caribbean. Too much money and no development of the actual game. And it's reflected, there's very little you could do about it unless it changes. If, for instance, Grenada gets banned from any money and anything, coming from FIFA, well, I force man going back and volunteer, then I don't have that pressure. So I had to use my ingenuity and my head to take care of football and footballers in Grenada, and I ain't gonna have the problem of some magical $10,000 appear out of the air. This money coming from the sky,
Okay.
Once there's a rationale behind it, I back on track.
Okay. Let me throw out an invitation to you. Are you willing to sit on a program yourself, Ram Folks, and possibly Ambrose Phillip, the General Secretary, the former General Secretary we have spoken a lot about, and we yet to speak to him because it's believed that Ambrose Phillip probably was one of the best General Secretaries to pass through Grenada football in a very long time. Are you willing, Paul Roberts, to sit on a program, one program with yourself, Ram Folks, and possibly Ambrose Phillip, and discuss football administration, discuss the pros and cons, arguments and counter arguments? Are you willing?
No, I have no problem with that, but what is the end result? Is an next talk shop? Blah, 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 blah. What are you going to do with the information? How will the information be able to change football?
We're documenting this time. It's not so much. That's why I was asking the question whether or not yourself, if you believe that yourself and Ram still
no
have
problem.
something to
No
add.
problem with that, but it's be an end game, like.
No, yeah.
It must be a positive end game to this thing, not just a talk shop. You're gonna tired of talk shop.
I understand the whole issue of what you believe to be a talk shop, but I'm talking about the discourse.
And I'm not hitting you, I'm saying that you have the correct approach to it. I have. Ambrose, you have a beautiful program.
Yeah.
But the thing is, everybody ignore that.
Yeah. But
I just not saying what they're doing.
I just want the discourse. That's the conversation.
Yeah, but I have no problem with that.
And the conversation could lead into something where we can get more people appreciate. Yeah, well, appreciated what you folks would have done. Not so much just a argument and tit for tat, but bringing points to the table, showing how things was done. Ideology might be different, but the whole idea is to get the views of the various persons who are involved there and see how people might be able to appreciate what was done then. And again, I'm making the point, it's not so much in terms of argument's sake, but more so of what you all would have achieved back then. The period would have been similar to some extent, the 60s and the 70s. And then in terms of playing, yourself and Ram playing, in terms of administration, Ambrose Phillip. That's the whole idea of it.
Yeah, we can go forward, but like I said already, anything I do, this is why Ram says that Pablo is a masher up, mashing up. The thing is, I have to have an end game. And you asking me to participate in documentation process again. Good God, I've been part and parcel of that. I was on the executive, made recommendations, and it was a big joke. Is this going to be a big joke again? Then it's. I hope it's not an exercise in futility. But no problem. Michael Bascom say something will come out of it. So I take your word for it.
No. Again, it's not that the discourse I'm saying, and I think it's important.
But you have to take the lead on it. You're younger than us, You have to take the lead,
But it's important.
Don't duck out of it, After you hear from us talk all our nonsense, you have to make sense out of it and implement.
But it's important for the public to hear from you folks, what it was like then and how public can help shape the future. That's the important thing. Help shape the future, and in some extent, the mistakes that were made that you probably can identify then are not made in the future. So that's the whole idea. Not that we're trying to too much compare, and contrast, but to ensure that what you all achieved then, whether it can be achieved in the future, obviously there will be some tweaking. But it's something we can think.
I think it's all right. Okay, I'm okay. I'm okay with it.
Yeah,
but you have to understand that on the program too, I'll be attacking in a nice, friendly way my friend Ram as, a student of Machiavelli, because
No, but
and you can take it in good faith. That's what we do.
but it's good, and I think it was referenced a bit earlier that how despite the differences in opinions, despite the differences in leadership style, ideology, and all of that, you all still remain best of buddies, still remain friends. And that is
Oh
the
yes, oh
important
yes.
that is the important thing that I think that some people have to learn about. That yes, you all would have played together, you all would have administrated together, you all had differences, but that did not interfere in your personal relationships.
Yeah.
And I think
The
this is
Ram has some good ideas, and
yeah.
so does Ambrose. I don't see necessarily, we don't see eye to eye relative to certain things. But that's the whole object of the idea. If you have three people around there, who agree on everything, well, oof, that's utility there. So we have different ideas of how to get things done. And me and Ram have worked it out. We've been critical about one another. Me and Ambrose have been critical of each other. But at the end of it all, we understand football. We know where football should go. And if that's what you want to get out of it, let's go. I'm all in.
Right, I appreciate that. So as we get ready to wrap, Paul, some parting words on you, but I want to zoom in again on the whole issue of the sports media, sports broadcasting, and how you think in wrapping, how you think we can fix that problem going forward. We spoke about the NTRC and the whole commitment of individuals and things like that. So, but what sort of commitment we can have coming out of this program in terms of what we like to see in terms of sports media in the future in Grenada?
Well, I think who it was, Harold said it right, and it could work. Was it Harold who said sports radio? It has to be a dedicated station, and I don't know how they're going to operate, particularly because you see, I know the rules and regulations of the NTRC. You could be spending the kind of monies for, in fact, a license to do something like that, and unless the NTRC is on board, you could be tempted to use the time which is supposed to be used in sport to bring in income. Now, I would like to see a dedicated radio station, if there's going to be one, devoid of trying to access advertising. It is sport. Must be underwritten. It's like a public broadcast system that you have up in the States, something like that.
Mhm.
So that you don't tie up half the time in dealing with promotion and advertising, which is probably going to be against, in fact, the sportsman anyways. You don't have to do so on because, I'm sorry about that. All right, a drink. Let's see one of our most popular alcoholic drinks in Grenada. That's where you get the most money advertising. And for you to take that and put in advertising because you need the money on sports radio, that would be defeating the purpose. That's one of the first areas I think that we have. That's why I didn't say no to the radio station. But yes, to a big production studio. But you have to do so and have a change of heart, a legislative change in the 2000 legislation that will give teeth, right, to NTRC to demand that each and every one of these 30 radio stations, TV stations, everyone dedicate, a half an hour to sport public, you know. If you don't do that, you won't reach. The problem is, don't forget why Ambrose succeeded was simply we just had, Radio Grenada. Everybody listened. That is how we succeeded by getting to every nook and cranny. So everybody must be on the same page. And to do that, you have to access the legislation, and NTRC must demand that we give to sport that which it deserves, because that is what creates the awareness and all. That helped me like mad.
But
I go abroad because of sport, and and this could happen to young people. So I think we need to look at the significance of it and look at the legislation. I say start with the legislation. I know you're going to say, oh God, Paul, here you go again. Everything starts with legislation. If it's legislated, Grenadans go obey the law, once it's legislated. Once you have it legislated, they ignore you. Look at the radio stations. How much sport they do? They don't
Well,
have to.
Toro is asking the question about how is that station going to pay staff, Grenlec, and other bills?
Like I say, PBS, everybody on board. Everybody on board. Like for instance, there's certain programs which I did. I did some public service stuff. Toro, for instance, Grenlec. I asked Grenlec to sponsor it, and Grenlec underwrote it. So I started to realize how we did it. You know, we do so on the telephone company. At the same, it was Cable and Wireless. We say Cable and Wireless, listen, this is what we want to do. Blah 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 blah. We want to be a part of it. No, this is a contribution. Boom, and we deal with it. But we have to be able to have a kind of PBS, sport PBS, in order for this thing to work. Otherwise, you can't leave it up to them 30 radio stations in Grenada. It won't work.
But Margaret is pointing to the changing landscape, the changing media landscape, and and as she's indicating, in today's world, one doesn't need traditional radio to disseminate information. Things are happening online, on social media, etc. That's what Michael is doing now. You have to rethink broadcast and communication technologies, which brings us to the point that which will make NPR setting broadcast policy sort of irrelevant.
Point made. But again, we have to do is yet to be figured out how many people actually use the internet for the purposes of accessing certain information. What I'm saying to you is, don't understand the value of the internet. But if you watch the kids, I watch kids. I mean, I'm a by if you put a sport program there, how you popularize it? Kids don't play sport again, right? And I mean, it's a card blast statement, but I'm saying compared to yesterday when everything is a sport, it is not so these days. Okay, Margaret, the internet is there and they access the internet for their own purposes. Who play TikTok, who do there's a lot of other things other than sport that they will look at which is more interesting. I'm saying to you is that let's use the only thing as an instant and must listen to system. And that's radio and our television in Grenada. So when you know at 4:30 in the afternoon, it is going to be sport. It is sport on every station because it's mandated by NTRC. When you have a serious cricket game or serious basketball game, it will be broadcast because you see you must broadcast 10 minutes at least at the basketball to show that you're on board with sport. You have to do it. There's no question about it. That's the only how you will quickly change and quickly develop and change the mindset of them youths. That's the only thing to do.
Okay, then. What a good way to wrap it, Paul. It has been a pleasure. Almost 3.5 hours of talking, and I'm certain the early days of the broadcasting era would have excited a lot of our
it was fantastic.
viewers and listeners because they got to know a lot about Paul Roberts. But Paul, the invitation is there, and also the suggestion by many of the viewers that you should probably start writing and putting something together. We need a book, Paul. Something needs to be documented.
Well, a lot of people go through the same experiences that I did, I suspect. Well, yes, I know, because I got into radio at 14 years old and I didn't know anything else either. So I guess it's just with time I sort of put two and two together and figure out what went around me. But yes, quite a number of people have, like I identified to you, I don't think Bonnie Fletcher is gone yet. Lou Smith is there. Lou Smith came in a little bit after me in Radio Grenada, so I suspect Lou would have a lot to tell you relative to, in fact, the culture, how we, in fact, involved in carnival and everything is like that, and he made a hell of a contribution. It changed a lot. So I think, quite a number of people I think have as much or more to offer you in way of giving information out there. Normally I don't do this, but I don't know, catch me at the right time, perfect storm. But thanks so much for the opportunity of airing all this nonsense experience I had. Hope it has meant something to some people and bring back some memories. Thanks again. Thanks so much, Mike.
Paul Roberts, the troublemaker.
Yes, troublemaker.
Yeah, well, it has been a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
All right, Mike, take care. Bye.
Yeah, okay then. So there you heard that from Paul Roberts. There has been quite a bit, and in case those who missed it, you can always log on to either the Facebook or the YouTube channel and get a whole of the entire episode of Paul Roberts. It's quite a lot. Yes, Margaret, Harold, Toro, Michael, you guys need to start documenting Grenada's media history before everyone disappears. Yeah, I think Toro we will nominate Toro to start doing that. Um, to start getting bits and pieces from the various media folks, and not just the on air and the writing, but even the technical aspect of it, because we had the late Alan Palmer, who left us earlier this year. And we had, I remember Chris Batiste and Martin Reddit, and folks who were not in the forefront of the media, but they were part of the media, and they were very critical in terms of the backbone of the media, the structure of the media, albeit the engineering aspect of it. Ray, who left us recently. And then we had Ray Roberts, who was giving us a sort of history of when he got in, the people he met. And I think it would be important that we start documenting, as Paul would have put out there, documenting the history and the evolving of media in Grenada through the various regime. It's important that we get that story, told. And I'm certain, even as Toro says, MWAG's history will be important, to give some information about. But our program continues on Thursday with the coordinator of sports. Well, we invited the Ministry of Sports through the Minister of Sports, and he has indicated that he will recommend that the coordinator of sports appear on the program. So our guest on the next program on Thursday, that's September 3rd, will be Mr. Curlin Peters, the acting coordinator of sports, and he'll be talking to us about the ministry's plans and preparations for the remainder of the year and into the new year in terms of sports. As you know, sports would have gotten a heavy beating in terms of the pandemic. And obviously, with the budget coming up, there's indication that there will be a cut in the allocation for sports. And all these things will be discussed in that program coming up with Colin Peters. Our next program will be the following Saturday. Unfortunately, we will not have a program next Saturday, which is actually the actual Labor Day weekend. There will be a program that will be on the 5th of September, but we'll have a program the following Saturday, which is the 12th, and hopefully we'll have the former sports minister. He's also a former sportsman, national sports basketballer, athlete. We'll be talking about Patrick Simmons, who's expected to join us on September 12th. That's Saturday, September 12th. He'll be speaking as a former national athlete, basketballer, former principal of the St. Andrews Anglican Secondary School, SAS, and also a former sports minister. And we'll be looking at whole issue regarding the national sports policy, when he put together the national sports policy and all the intricacies regarding the national sports policies and other things. Okay then, so folks, thank you for being part of today's program. I hope you enjoyed it with Paul Roberts, and look forward to see you on Thursday when we have Mr. Colin Peters, and then the following Saturday with Mr. Patrick Simmons. Thank you very much, and goodbye.